I didn't update. Oh, this is fucking shit show. Oh wait, we're live.
Perfect.
I didn't update the thing, so I can't put the normal thing up. So it just has to be our faces immediately. Hello,
Hello.
we're here. Um, Hopefully the stream is working. YouTube is telling me the connection is very bad. So as you people start to come in, please tell me if that's true or not. Because in my preview stream, the connection looks fine.
It looks good to me also.
Yeah. So I'm
And it
a little
sounds good to
confused.
me.
Yeah, I'm a little
also.
confused as to what the heck Senior YouTube is talking about.
Let's just ignore that fool and get started.
All right. Do we want to wait for more people to pile in, or do we want to just do the thing? Let me tweet it. I should tweet it.
Yeah.
We have 1,000 subscribers. Come, all you
Yes.
people. You just got to.
Now.
It's because we don't tell people to hit that bell.
Yeah, that's why.
We gotta say hit that bell. Hit that bell. Are you typing hit that bell?
I will be.
Share copy. We are live. This is very professional. What's with all the dashes?
It makes it more official.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you say so.
Yeah.
You know what, Matt? Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
I have hit the record button on my recording device that I have not used in a week.
I have now also hit the button.
That's confusing. Why did you state that so confusing?
Just to make it extra emphatic.
All right, let's go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Scott Daly, and I have a story to tell.
And my name is Matt Freeman, and I also have a story to tell. But I'm going to tell it tomorrow.
That sounds good. If you're joining us here for the first time, welcome. Here's a quick primer on how this whole thing works. Each month, Matt and I select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all our supporters on Patreon and let them vote on which book they would like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins. And then we all read it.
Yeah, that's right. We meet up on the last Friday of every month, and then we chat about it. We pull slides for important or interesting moments and dive deep into this book for a couple of hours. For those of you in the chat right now, feel free to make comments and ask questions as we go. We want this thing to be an interactive discussion. So tell us about this month's book, Scott.
Well, in celebration of 1 year, 12 months of the book club, we decided to go back to the well of books that have just barely didn't make the cut. So we pulled 5 of our runner-ups from previous votes, and we put them back in a poll, and we had you guys vote on them again. And you picked Hyperion by Dan Simmons. And I guess I can go ahead and read the Goodreads summary.
Okay.
On the world called Hyperion, beyond the law of the hegemony of man, there waits the creature called the Shrike. How does your audiobook pronounce that, Matt?
Shrike, yeah.
Okay. There are those who worship it, there are those who fear it, and there are those who have vowed to destroy it. In the valley of the time tombs, where the huge brooding structures move back forward through time, the Shrike waits for them all. On the eve of Armageddon, with the entire galaxy at war, 7 pilgrims set forth on a final voyage to Hyperion, seeking the answers to the unsolved riddles of their lives. Each carries a desperate hope and a terrible secret, and one may hold the fate of humanity in his hands. So, Matt, had you ever read Hyperion before, and what did you think of it?
I had not. I had heard that it was really good for a long time, and I'm really glad that we got the opportunity to read it. Mm-hmm. This is a great book. I guess we can say right out here in the front of the discussion that it has a very interesting structure. Specifically, that the book, it has a framing story, and then each of the pilgrims has their own sub story within the story, which is entirely theirs, and it's them telling the story of why they're here.
Yeah, it's
And
basically Canterbury Tales, but with
yes,
spaceships.
that's right. And the stories are referred to as the cantos, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so it's great. I mean, in terms of first impressions or in terms of overall impressions of the book, I will say, and maybe you disagree that some of the sub stories were much better than others. None of them were, terrible. It was a very enjoyable read all the way through. But like, I just thought it was interesting, kind of to point out like how some of them were like had me thinking about them days and days later, and some of them I just couldn't even remember what happened afterward.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think in general, I find the stories themselves to be much more interesting than the surrounding structure element on the stories, which is good in this book because it's barely there. Like the story of this book outside of the tales is just people go from place X to place Y, and then the story ends. And then like we don't even get the resolution of that surrounding structure, right? This book ends. There's a sequel to this book. It very much feels like this is part one of two. But if you focus on the stories themselves, they do kind of tell a complete, if not totally resolved tale of these people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. There's really only one point where I felt like I was left hanging on one of the stories. It was one of my favorite stories, and I felt like we didn't get the resolution that I wanted. And I'm going to save talking about that until we actually get to that character, though.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I think overall, I really, really adored this book. I thought it was those stories were so much fun. There's parts of it that you're absolutely right are difficult. There's some of the stories that I didn't like as much. I was very surprised that I didn't like it because the setting of that story seems to be something that is right up my alley. But I just think the way Simmons executed on it just didn't work for me as well. But I thought this overall was a great read, and I can't wait to dive into what I think it's saying.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So let's start with the prologue, Matt.
Okay.
Let's start with I have a bone to pick with the prologue.
Okay.
You have been chosen to return to Hyperion, came a woman's husky voice. Full visuals had not yet formed. The air remained empty except for the pulse of transmission codes which told the consul that the flatline squirt had originated in the hegemony administrative world of Tau Ceti Center. The consul did not need the transmission coordinates to know this. The aged but still beautiful voice of Mina Gladstone was unmistakable. You have been chosen to return to Hyperion as a member of the Shrike pilgrimage, continued the voice. The hell you say? Thought the consul, and rose to leave the pit. You and 6 others have been selected by the Church of the Shrike and confirmed by the All Thing, said Mina Gladstone. It is in the interest of the hegemony that you accept. The consul stood motionless in the pit, his back to the flickering transmission codes. Without turning, he raised his glass and drained the last of the scotch. The situation is very confused, said Mina Gladstone. Her voice was weary. The Consulate and Home Rule Council flatlined us 3 standard weeks ago with the news that the time tombs showed signs of opening. The anti-entropic fields around them were expanding rapidly, and the Shrike has begun ranging as far south as the Bridle Range. The consul turned and dropped into the cushions. A hollow had formed of Mina Gladstone's ancient face. Her eyes looked as tired as her voice sounded. A forced space task force was immediately dispatched from Parvati to evacuate the hegemony citizens on Hyperion before the time tombs open. Their time debt will be a little more than 3 Hyperion years. Mina Gladstone paused. The consul thought he had never seen the Senate CEO look so grim. We do not know if the evacuation fleet will arrive in time, she said, but the situation is even more complicated. An ouster migration cluster of at least 4,000 units has been detected approaching the Hyperion system. Our evacuation task force should arrive only a short while before the ousters. So, Matt,
Uh-huh.
that's a whole lot of nonsense.
Yeah. So I think you and I had the same impression here, which is that
Yeah.
I this is not the way I like a science fiction book to begin.
Mm-mm.
In fact, when this book started, I had that like, oh no feeling of like, oh, is this book going to actually suck? But no, this book did not actually suck. But yeah, this dump of like, here's everything that's going to happen, except we're using words that you don't know what they mean, and we're using all of the words at the same time
Yeah.
so that you can't infer what they mean from context. And that's not great, I think.
I think we talked about this back with the Lies of Locke Lamora months and months ago, and we called them out for doing it there. This is that like on overdrive.
Yeah.
Because this is just a small section of the prologue, and the entire prologue is like this. It's just word, 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 word. You have very little emotional attachment. You don't know what any of this means.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just it's overwhelming, and it caused me to start and stop this book like 5 times. Like I
Yeah.
started reading and was like, I can't do this right now. Put it down and had to come back later.
I think the critical thing is you don't really care about the consul at first, and it actually takes a pretty long time for him to exhibit any character traits whatsoever that would
Yeah.
make you care about him. And so it's a bit of a problem that he's the framing story. I see why, due to the nature of his story. I don't want to say it had to be that way because I don't think it had to be that way.
I don't think so.
But I see why we know so little about him as a person. I think that was not the best choice. I think I'm not gonna be critical of this book too much. I'm trying to kind of get it off my chest at the beginning that like the framing story was probably the weakest part of the story, and a big part of that was that you don't care about the consul, and that could have been avoided, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's ironic because even when it comes time for the consul story, he is not the emotional hook of that story. It is someone else. He kind of comes into it at the end of the story, and you kind of understand more of who he is as a person, and maybe start to care about him. But that's the last 20 pages of the book at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I completely agree. Like the difficulty I had in reading this book was not based on enjoyment. It was anytime we cut. It's kind of like the short story syndrome, like I think it takes longer for me to read collections of short stories than it does for me to read a novel, because like you finish and it feels like a good stopping place, and then like starting up again is always kind of difficult because you have to get emotionally invested in a new story. It was like that for me, except for the framing structure. I had no emotional investment to it all.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so that is the prologue. Luckily, thank God, it gets so much better after that.
Yeah, I think it gets better pretty quickly too, because
I agree.
Once the pilgrims have met and you have all these personalities who are kind of sketched out, we have the Shrike pilgrims who are all together trying to figure out why the hell they've been selected to be the Shrike pilgrims. And it results in an idea that is basically the structural binding of our story, to tell stories. And it goes, "My point has been made, I believe," said Saul Weintraub. "None of us admits to subscribing to the Shrike cult dogma, yet the elders of that perceptive group have chosen us over many millions of the petitioning faithful to visit the time tombs, and their fierce God, in what may be the last such pilgrimage." The consul shook his head. "Your point may be made, M. Weintraub," he said, "but I fail to see it." The scholar absently stroked his beard. "It would seem that our reasons for returning to Hyperion are so compelling that even the Shrike Church and the hegemon probability intelligences agree that we deserve to return," he said. "Some of these reasons, mine for instance, may appear to be public knowledge, but I am certain that none are known in their entirety except to the individuals at this table. I suggest that we share our stories in the few days remaining to us." "Why?" said Colonel Cassad. "It would seem to serve no purpose." Weintraub smiled. "On the contrary, it would, at the very least, amuse us and give us a glimpse of our fellow travelers' souls before the Shrike or some other calamity distracts us. Beyond that, it might just give us enough insight to save all of our lives if we were intelligent enough to find the common thread of experience which binds all our fates to the whim of the Shrike." Yeah, so Weintraub, it's really funny actually to me that so I did audiobook as usual, and I assumed that his name was Saul, Saul, because he's Jewish, but it's Sol, Saul, like the sun. I think it's a really fun touch.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I enjoy and I appreciate that the book kind of takes the time to explain the structure to us in a way. Like we have one of our characters argue for it, and he kind of convinces the others that this is what we should do. So we don't just like go like. As much as I don't like this overarching structure of the novel, I like that Simmons took the time to explain it to us in world, like why we're sharing these stories, why these people are doing things, and I think Saul has a point here.
Yeah, right. And I like that there's actually pushback. Like it makes it feel more realistic, at least that the characters themselves are pretty cagey, especially the consul actually. But like most of them don't want to tell their story because they feel like it usually doesn't reflect terribly well on them, and involves some terrible secret, like the Goodreads summary said.
Yeah, and I think at the very end of the book, the consul like flips out at I forget who it is, at one of the other people, and he says something effective. I never thought I was going to have to share this with
Yeah.
anyone, and their response is basically, yeah, none of us did either.
Yeah.
These are like tales that they were not thinking they were ever going to have to tell. They are intensely personal. They are intensely embarrassing in some cases, heartbreaking in others. Yeah, I mean, I like that reticence, but I like that
Yeah.
Weintraub has a point.
And due to the ordering of the stories, I think characters who would have been inclined not to share end up sharing because they learn from the stories that came before them and realize, like, oh, these people do need to know this actually.
Yeah, and as we go, I want to kind of zoom in on the order that
Hmm.
Simmons decided to put them in, because I think that is kind of revealing to how he is introducing us to this world. Because like the Canterbury Tales before it, what these stories do on top of showing these characters is they build a picture of what the world looks like.
Hmm.
We kind of go through. I mean, we specifically we go through a priest, a military man, a poet, a scholar, a detective, and a government agent, and so we're kind of seeing through these people. We're putting pieces of what the world is like together, and we're basically explaining everything that was in that nonsense prologue over the entire course of the book, but we're doing
Right.
it the exact way you should, which is slowly over the course of time, and linking you back to things that people reading would understand. And those terms are kind of laid out to us in ways we can understand. And I think Simmons does a fairly good job of making it of having it so we don't have characters like explaining stuff to each other that they should already know for our sake. I think there are some moments of that in the book to me, where someone's like, as part of one guy's story, he's telling about like X thing, which is something that everyone else listening would probably definitely know about. But I think those are, few and far between.
Yeah, I agree that it was never enough that I noticed it if it did
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. I will say, I didn't pull the slide, but when all these characters meet at the first time, it's very unforgiving as far as getting your brain a handle on who is what, like who is who, and like there's just seven names that are dropped in front of us, and they're kind of not all easy names to remember and differentiate. And I was so happy when I saw that, oh, we're just going to zoom into these characters one at a time, and I was going to actually be able to learn who they are, because that whenever everyone's sitting around at a table and you just met all these characters, it's very kind of difficult to follow.
Yeah, it's definitely a big ask to throw that many people in at the same time, but I think he did a really good job at making them all really distinct personalities.
Yeah.
And it probably helped a lot that the voice acting was really good on the audiobook. But even if that weren't the case, I feel like I would have been able to keep them separate because they're really all very different archetypes.
Yeah, I mean that is literally what they are. They are archetype drawn characters, and we'll get into that as we get into their stories.
Yeah.
So,
So let's do it.
all right, all right. Jake in chat asks or says, "I wonder what Scott looked like when he had a full head of hair." It was thick and curly. I
Hmm.
don't know, Matt. That's accurate, right?
That's an
It was
accurate
it was
description.
poofy. It was poofy.
It was a bit poofy. Kept it
Yeah,
cut short usually.
yeah. I had to. Like I can't do long hair.
It was also darker than your beard, weirdly.
Yeah, that's true. My hair was like almost black, and this is lighter brown with some fun stuff mixed in.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's go on to the first tale. Let's talk about the priest's tale, titled "The Man Who Cried God." Sometimes there's a thin line separating orthodox zeal from apostasy, said Father Lenar Hoyt. So began the priest's story. Later, dictating the tale in his comlog, the consul remembered it as a seamless whole, minus the pauses, hoarse voice, false starts, and small redundancies which were timeless failings of human speech. Leonard Hoyt had been a young priest, born, raised, and only recently ordained in the Catholic world of Pesum when he was given his first off-world assignment. He was ordered to escort the respected Jesuit father Paul Dure into quiet exile on the colony world of Hyperion. In another time, Father Paul Dure certainly would have become a bishop and perhaps a pope. Tall, thin, aesthetic, with a white hair receding from a noble brown eyes and eyes too filled with the sharp edges of experience to hide their pain. Paul Dure was a follower of Saint Teilhard, as well as an archaeologist, ethnologist, and eminent Jesuit theologian. Despite the decline of the Catholic Church into what amounted to a half-forgotten cult, tolerated because of its quaintness and isolation from the mainstream hegemony life, Jesuit logic had not lost its bite. Nor had Father Dure lost his conviction that the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church continued to be humankind's last best home for immortality. To Leonard Hoyt as a boy, Father Dure had been a somewhat godlike figure when glimpsed during his rare visits to the pre-seminary schools, or on the would-be seminarians' ever rarer visits to the New Vatican. Then, during the years of Hoyt's study in seminary, Dure had been on an important church-sponsored archaeological dig in the nearby world of Armagast. When the Jesuit returned a few weeks after Hoyt's ordination, it had been under a cloud. No one outside the highest circles of the New Vatican knew precisely what had happened, but there were whispers of excommunication and even of a hearing before the Holy Office of the Inquisition, dormant the 4 centuries since the confusion following the death of Earth. All right, so Father Hoyt, and more specifically in the story, Father Paul Dure, and Catholicism. So the first story we go into and the first kind of window into this world is a window through the lens of religion. And I wanted to talk to you about that because I think religion plays a pretty important role in the themes of this book and what this book is saying and how religion is viewed in this society. Catholicism itself, a religion that people reading this book in 1989 when it came out know very well, exists, but in a kind of different form here.
Yeah, he plays with religion a lot in this book and really focuses a lot on Catholicism. I almost suspect that he must be Catholic. but
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the religion aspect is throughout both kind of the science fiction frame of the story and also what the characters struggle with individually. Even
Right.
if they're not religious, it kind of has a kind of guilt and absolution theme to everything. Another thing I want to talk about with this slide is that he changes sort of the tone quite a bit between the stories. Like in this one, we have these kind of long sentences with a lot of clauses. It's very it's written in the style of like we're going to be telling you a long and personal sort of travelogue type story.
Yeah.
And then eventually it actually switches into the actual recordings of the priest's recording device so it's like literally dictated. So it's just he plays with tone and sort of the way the story is being told quite a lot throughout the book.
Yeah, and I think we need to make sure we give Dan Simmons as much credit for this as possible because I don't think this structure works if you don't make the voice of each of these characters distinct and unique. It doesn't feel like you're listening to 6 different people tell 6 different stories. It feels like you're listening to one author relay different stories to you, and that is not the way this feels. You're absolutely right that each and every voice here is unique and different, and the way they either write or tell or dictate or what have you is different and changes, and that is a very detectable change as you move from person to person and story to story.
Yeah, I think personally the Priest's Tale was my favorite actually.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe.
I really liked it a lot. And I think we've got one more slide in here we'll get to in a bit, but I like what the story is kind of saying about faith here because we learn here that Father Dure, the reason why he is sent to Hyperion, the reason why he is not excommunicated but exiled from the church is because he faked a finding to prove the existence of God outside of Earth and therefore had to have been true if it was thousands of years prior to old Earth Christianity and Catholicism and all that. But he wasn't able to find this on this dig, so he faked it, and that's what he got in trouble for. And I think that goes back to this idea of this story is primarily about faith. And we have another story with Saul that deals with religion a lot, but I think it's a different form of religion. It's talking about Saul's ethical challenges with religion, but this is about faith and rediscovering your faith, and then kind of having that rediscovery like ripped away from you a little bit.
Turned into a horror story.
Yeah, I don't think Dan Simmons has a very positive view of religion.
Yeah, yeah. This was some Black Mirror shit here. Yeah.
All right, so we'll go into we have one more slide, and then I didn't pull a lot of slides for Father Dure's dealings with the 40 how many were there? I forget what the 70 or something. I don't remember how much a score is.
I
So
thought it was four score and 10. Yeah, I don't remember.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it was 70. There's 70 of them.
yeah. Then that would be 3 score and 10. Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So
This slide.
all right. So on the next slide, Paul DeRay witnesses a murder, and at its autopsy, we reflect on life and death. These are important themes throughout the story. So this is what the whole thing's worth, he said as he opened the poor man's belly like a pink satchel, pulling the folds of skin and muscle back and pinning them down like tent flaps. What thing? I asked. His life, said the doctor, and pulled the skin of the corpse's face up and back like a greasy mask. Your life, my life. The red and white stripes of overlapping muscle turned to blue bruise around the ragged hole just above the cheekbone. There has to be more than this, I said. The doctor looked up from his grim work with a bemused smile. Is there? He said. Please show me. He lifted the man's heart and seemed to weigh it in one hand. In the web worlds, this would be worth some money on the open market. There's those too poor to keep back-grown, cloned parts on store, but too well off to die just for want of a heart. But out here, it's just awful. There has to be more, I said, although I felt little conviction. I remembered the funeral of His Holiness Pope Urban XV shortly before I left Pacem. As had been the custom since Hegira days, the corpse was not embalmed. It waited in the anteroom off the main basilica to be fitted in the plain wooden coffin. As I helped Edouard and Monsignor Frey place the vestments on the stiffened corpse, I noticed the browning skin and the slackening mouth.
Yeah, so I love this because this is Father Duray is a man who has completely lost his faith, so much so that he, as we said, he tried to fake something to inspire people to return to the church and give his life purpose, and he's dealing with the senseless murder of someone. The part right after this goes on to say like they turn into description of the person who killed him to the city center, and nothing was ever happened. Like this death is nothing; it doesn't matter. And he relates. He takes the image of a pointless, senseless death, and just biology, and relates it back to the Pope, the most important member of his church, the holiest member of his church, the man who, according to the Catholic Church, speaks directly with the voice of God. He relates these two senseless things back. So, I mean, this is a man who his faith is basically gone.
Yeah, right. It's I love how that's written actually, because the fact that he is having extreme doubts is not telegraphed like obviously. It's only shown in a couple of places that like when he, people are dying around him all the time and he's always having to give the rite of extreme unction, and like how it's he wants it to mean something, but he suspects that it's just perfunctory and doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And it's just a great character whose head you're inhabiting, because he's like a really good person, and you feel bad for him for all these things that are happening to him.
Yeah.
On top of the fact that it's a really good story.
Yeah, well, and I think his reticence of fully declaring his lack of faith makes sense when you see how the tale is structured, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's the whole audio log he's doing is supposed to be back to his friend Edouard,
Mm-hmm.
who is another member of the church. So he probably would not feel very comfortable just outright saying, "I have lost my faith in God. I don't know what to believe anymore." He would cage that and case that much more subtly, because it's not something he's probably proud of admitting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and I like this when you go back to the first line of the story, right, which is Father Hoyt says, sometimes there's a thin line separating orthodox zeal from apostasy. And I think that's kind of that's the central theme of this whole thing, right? That so we move from this, he goes to the 70 and finds these weird people who do nothing but recognize his crucifix, which is this important moment for him. Then he discovers that there's like a whole chapel built in the side of the cliff that is more ancient than Earth itself, meaning that Christianity, Catholicism, the God of this religion, what is right, it existed before all this stuff, and it turns out to just not quite be that way. So I guess that's a question I have for you: is what do you take on the symbol of the cross being used as basically like an alien, presumably like an offshoot of the Shrike itself, as kind of like a parasite.
Yeah, interesting. I might throw that question back at you in a second because it sounds like you might have thought more about this than me. But like there's definitely some stuff with time travel happening. So um, I was never quite sure if the implication is that some force went back in time, built this chamber, built all these like thousands of miles of tunnels under the planets to serve as
Mm-hmm.
some kind of like civilizational arc for humans in the future, because they find all these tunnels and they don't know who made them. And my thought is like, well, I think the humans probably made them, to time traveling
Right.
humans or
Yeah.
something like that. And the Shrike is coming back from the future too. So it's like, do we have kind of a predestination paradox thing happening? I will say that the shape of the cross, is very obviously kind of symbolically similar to the Shrike's like tree on which it impales people
Yeah. Yeah.
forever. So it's kind of a horrifying, like horror inversion of what the cross means in Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, metaphorically, Simmons is saying here that the cross, the crucifix, the symbol of Christianity, the symbol of Catholicism, is a parasitical thing that, like, so I can see, like, the cross being placed on you grants you basically immortal life, right? Because anytime
Hmm.
you die, you're just regrown, which is representative of the gift of the church is immortal life, right? Like the to Catholicism, once you die, if you have accepted Jesus and have been absolved of your sins, you go to heaven and live eternally. Um, and it's kind of like a horrible
Parody.
inversion. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're exactly. Like it's eternal life in like the cruelest, most awful way, because as we learn at the end of the story, Father Dure like saw it as an evil thing at the end, and actually was definitely preaching apostasy by the
Yeah.
end when he goes up on a tree and literally crucifies himself, to try to get the crucifix off him and die.
It dies like 1,000 times and is in just this incredible suffering and
Yeah, yeah.
um,
I mean,
basically
it's
creates
yeah
a hell for himself to try to escape from
from
from the cross.
Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and the images of the crucifixion. I mean, that's very specific and very distinct, and it's crazy. Like David in chat is saying that the Dan Simmons, sorry, review of religion is much softer and more nuanced in book two. I could see that happening. I don't think he's specifically like super anti-religion as a concept. I think this is very targeted towards Christianity and Catholicism, and his view on these through the symbol of the cross being this life-giving but ultimately destructive evil force is not nuanced.
Right. So, and there's something we're probably going to tease it out more as the discussion goes on, but it's pretty hard to actually talk about, you know, precisely because it's a fairly complex thing to talk about. Which is that the story kind of suggests that God is real, but God is actually like the time traveling, like the backwards time traveling gestalt consciousness of humanity plus the machine intelligence or some crazy thing like that.
Yeah.
So like like there may actually be some kind of personal God who's like sending visions to Saul Weintraub, for example. But if it is, it's not like what he thinks it is. It's some kind of weird future tech thing. But is that the same thing as what he think? I don't know. Like I had a lot of, it was very like evocative, but I couldn't quite nail down exactly what I was, exactly what he was trying to say. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does any of that resonate with you?
Well, I mean, one of the interesting things to me is throughout the book, and we'll get to more specific examples of this later, is kind of the push and pull between old Earth culture and what things look like in the future. Um, and how so much of the hegemonic culture is like couched in reverence of the way things were and the way things still should stay. And I think that kind of interpretation of the god of this world being something much different from the gods of the books that people read about back on old Earth, um, is kind of a good example of that kind of push and pull and that difficulty for people to kind of evolve into a new understanding of things. Like I don't know if how many years in the future is this supposed to be? It's more than 500, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it's 500 or 600. I
Yeah.
don't remember actually.
There are things that are referenced in this story from our time that I would find it very difficult to believe 500 years from now people will reference as casually as they do. But I think the book offers a very interesting and accurate explanation as to exactly why those things are referenced. And I think this idea of a god as something unlike anything we've ever thought of before, and the kind of rejection of that, like Father Dure sees this crucifix, like it or not, is a representative of a power that is beyond anything he's ever experienced before.
Mm.
It is not the God of Christianity. It is not the God that people on old Earth believed in. It is something different, and his reaction to that is nothing but evil. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
that it's terrible, and he's got to get it off him as soon as possible. And I think that's I don't know where I was going with that, but I just find that interesting.
That's kind of where I am with a lot of this stuff, where I don't really know where I'm going, but I wanted to air the ideas of
Yeah.
what is he saying about religion and what is he saying about the nature of God, and how religion and the true nature of God may actually be in conflict, and then what do you do?
Right. Yeah. Well, you crucify yourself and die 1,000 times until the thing falls off you,
Yeah, yeah.
and then it just gets put on another person because there's actually no stopping it.
Yeah, that was kind of the like stinger of the story, was like, oh, he got it off him, and then the other priest just put it on himself.
Yeah.
Great.
And lives in constant pain every minute of every day because he left the planet and is only surviving by painkillers.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That was rough.
Yep.
All right, but let's move on to the next story. Let's talk about The Soldier's Tale, which is titled The War Lovers. It was during the Battle of Agincourt that Fedman Cassad encountered the woman he would spend the rest of his life seeking. It was wet and chilly. It was a wet and chilly late October morning in AD 1415. Cassad had been inserted as an archer into the army of Henry V of England. The English force had been on French soil since August 14 and had been retreating from superior French forces since August 8th. Henry had convinced his war council that the army could beat the French in a forced march to the safety of Calais. They had failed. Now, as October 25th dawned, gray and drizzly, 7,000 Englishmen, mostly bowmen, faced a force of some 28,000 French men-at-arms across a kilometer of muddy field. Cassad was cold, tired, sick, and scared. He and the other archers had been surviving on little more than scavenged berries for the past week of the march, and almost every man in the line that morning was suffering from diarrhea. The air temperature was in the low 50s Fahrenheit, and Cassad had spent a long night trying to sleep on damp ground. He was impressed with the unbelievable realism of the experience. The Olympus Command School Historical Tactical Network was far beyond regular stim sims, as full-form hollows were beyond tin types. But the physical sensations were so convincing, so real, that Cassad did not relish the thought of being wounded. There were tales of cadets receiving fatal wounds in the OCH HTN sims and being pulled dead from their immersion creches. So I think Cassad's story is fascinating, and I think you said before you started recording that some of the actiony parts of it weren't as interesting to you, but I agree. But this opening got me into the story immediately. This idea of kind of a full realism sim where he's going back to one of the most important battles in early British history is kind of awesome.
Yeah, I like almost everything about Cassad's story. I like his character. I like how he's drawn, and I like the science fiction concepts that are introduced in his story, because it almost feels like this whole tangent where the author just wants to talk about like his military technology science fiction ideas.
Yeah.
Literally the only parts that I didn't like were the actual action parts,
Right.
which is weird because normally those are normally the most exciting parts. But I think a big part of it, honestly, is that there really are not substantial stakes in almost any of the action parts because one, he gets out of it alive because he's telling the story.
Right.
And then there usually isn't like that's fine. It's fine to know your character is going to get out of it alive if you have some other kind of supplemental stakes, and there's usually also not those either because it's just a question. It's almost always just a question of is he going to survive? I'm referring specifically to the sequence where he um, is on like the medic ship and it's attacked by the ousters and he has to fight his way out. Like he's merely fighting for survival, and then it becomes interesting, I think, when he kind of lands and finds the strike. But I don't know. It's a pretty minor nitpick. I hate to spend that much time talking about it, but it's like it's always interesting to me when something is like almost a grand slam, but it like just has that little flaw, and I'm like, well, why was that flaw there? I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a negative attitude.
No, I mean, I think out of any of the stories, well, okay, not out of any of the stories, but out of some of the stories, this one feels like the most padded. I think you're absolutely right that the whole scene on the med ship went on for way too long. Like,
Hmm.
I guess it's cool to see how he like is unrelenting in his refusal to die. Like he never gives up. He always keeps fighting. He always keeps pushing forward. And a lot of the motivation for that is this mysterious woman that he keeps seeing in battles, both fake and real, who I guess ends up being the Shrike. Like they never make that fully clear, but certainly seems like it,
Yeah, I think that's
or at least like an avatar. Like the Shrike is like this thing. It's just this thing that I don't. It's not
yeah.
explained really,
I
and it's
don't
it's intentionally left ambiguous.
right. I don't even want to speculate on
Right.
what her relationship is with the Shrike because it seems like there's a lot of evidence that she's her own person, but then there's some evidence that they're not. So yeah, I don't know if I love how that was done, but I mean it's fine because within the story, all that matters is that it's like a mysterious thing that he doesn't understand and that you're not supposed to understand.
Yeah.
Um,
And like the previous story where we used this framing device to talk about religion as it relates to um, modern day Earth and future sci-fi world, the Cassad story serves to tell us about the military and warfare, and that's the next slide.
Yeah, Daniel in the chat says if these OCS HTN sims really existed, there would totally be a civilian market for that sort of thing. Yeah, this is one of those science fiction ideas where you're like, oh, that's just what everyone would do all the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wonder. Like he says in here that they're dangerous, and he's heard of people dying. If you die in the sim, you die in real life. I wonder how much truth there is to that. That feels like a rumor thing that they spread amongst the cadets as they go through it. If they were really that unsafe, I don't think they would be plugging people into them for training.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so in the next slide, we learn about the new Bushido code. So let's get into this.
All right.
The new Bushido code, which governed Colonel Kassad's life, had evolved out of the necessity for the military class to survive. After the obscenities of the late 20th and early 21st centuries on Old Earth, when military leaders had committed their nations to strategies wherein entire civilian populations were legitimate targets, while their uniformed executioners sat safe in self contained bunkers 50 meters under the earth, the repugnance of the surviving civilians was so great that for more than a century the word military was an invitation to a lynching. As the new Bushido evolved, it combined the age old concepts of honor and individual courage with the need to spare civilians whenever possible. It also saw the wisdom of returning to the pre Napoleonic concepts of small, non total wars with defined goals and prescribed excesses. The Code demanded a forsaking of nuclear weapons and strategic bombing campaigns in all but the most extreme cases, but more than that, it demanded a return to old Earth medieval concepts of set battles between small professional forces at a mutually agreed upon time in a place where destruction of public and private property, would be kept to a minimum. This code worked well for the first 4 centuries of post-Hijra expansion. The fact that essential technologies were essentially frozen in place for 3 of those centuries worked in the hegemony's favor, as its monopoly on the use of farcasters allowed it to apply the modest resources of force at the right place in the required amount of time. Even when separated by the inevitable leap years of time debt, No colonial or independent world could hope to match the power of the hegemony. Incidents such as the political rebellion on Maui Covenant, with its unique guerrilla warfare, or the religious insanity of Comriade, were put down quickly and firmly, and any excesses in the campaigns merely pointed out the importance of returning to the strict code of the new Bushido. But for all the forces, calculations, and preparations, no one had adequately planned on the inevitable confrontation with the ousters.
So the new Bushido Code, Matt.
Yeah,
Let's talk about this for a bit.
uh, yeah, I like this.
I think this is a fascinating kind of thought exercise
Hmm.
on how how war and military would have to expand in the world going forward, especially coming from this book came out and I think it was 1989. So the Cold War had not been over for very long when Dan Simmons was writing this, and kind of like, okay, if civilization is going to survive, there's going to have to be some kind of change in how people conduct war, and he kind of lays all this out.
Yeah, I mean, I think in his science fiction world, the Cold War didn't end. We probably had a nuclear exchange,
Right.
and it probably led to this kind of mentality that like, if we're going to settle our differences, it's going to have to be within some kind of convention of warfare. Like the idea of non-total wars is of course a reference to the fact that like World War I and World War II were total wars where the whole economies of these countries were pitted against each other, and they were ridiculously destructive. But I like that there's like a pragmatism here, because I honestly don't think that just because a really bad thing happened, like worse. Let me put it this way: horrible atrocities have already happened in our world, and it hasn't actually led to any kind of like top-down um, ethical reconstitution of how the military works.
Yeah.
But what's actually like the pragmatic reason that I think the new Bushido thing actually works is that the hegemony has this overwhelming crushing force. So the soldiers who work for the hegemony can afford to be ethical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's true, but I also think they've kind of got themselves into a perfect situation now where, like it says here at the end, um, like any excesses in any of the campaigns that cause them to like break the Bushido code are just used to redefine and re-emphasize how important it is. So like there's very big hints here that the hegemony is breaking this code all the time when the situation calls for it, but then they just use the existence of the code and their fact that they had to break it as reason why they should use the code more. It seems to me that the hegemony thinks that this code is important when dealing with people attacking us, but if we have to break them, if we have to escalate against them, it's okay.
Yeah, there may actually, and in fact, now that you mention that, there may be an incredibly obvious piece of hypocrisy here toward the end when they mention the political rebellion on Maui Covenant.
Yeah, which is a very subtle
Yeah,
setup for what happens at the end of the book. Yeah.
yeah, and it's mentioned. So like the Maui Covenant is mentioned in like everyone's story.
Right.
This hint that this is going to be important is dropped over and over, and um, yeah, so like right here, he's saying any excesses in the campaign, and we know for a fact that the Maui Covenant attack was this just brutal repression.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's he may not be lying consciously, but he's definitely spinning things.
Right. And I think overall the Bushido code seems to me as another form of hegemony control, right? Like
Hmm.
it's just a way like the first sentence of this section is the new Bushido code which governed Colonel Kassad's life. Like
Hmm.
this is the defining aspect of his life, and it's because he was kind of like had it drilled into him as a soldier. So it's just another method of them control. Like I love how it said evolved out of the necessity for the military class to survive. It doesn't say that this code evolved out of the necessity for society, for civilization, for humanity as a whole to survive going into the future, just for a military class of people to kind of keep up the military industrial complex in a future where we can blow each other up by flicking a switch. We don't actually want to do that. It's not actually like they're coding it as like this return to honor and return to like civilized warfare, but it's really just a way to keep things going the way they are, which is what the hegemony is. It's just a thing that just keeps things static.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because maybe this is not historically accurate, but like I feel like both the original Japanese Bushido and the like Western chivalry were sort of just propaganda tools to be like, look at the noble
Sure.
warriors and how they protect you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the warriors in those ancient cultures may have actually taken them seriously, but that doesn't mean they weren't also propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, just because the warriors took them seriously doesn't mean like all conflict and warfare was engaged that way, for
Yeah,
sure. Like,
yeah,
I think we like to think of like there was a distinct, point in which combat switched over from this very noble, civilized, ordered kind of thing to the chaos, total war stuff. But I mean, it's really just the weapons have gotten better. I think
hmm
people were always doing shady shit in war because that's war.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think it's all kind of bullshit. I mean, and we learn as we go that the hegemony is just kind of bullshit itself. So
yeah,
that kind of ties in. I like here, like this is we also like you said, we do get Maui Covenant and every one of these things. We also get little hints and tracks laid throughout this book about the fact that things aren't changing. Human beings, civilization, society is not advancing. We say here the fact that essential technologies were essentially frozen in place for 3 of those centuries, 300 years, and essential technology basically hasn't changed. And that we hit that beat over and over again throughout the story.
yeah. Again, another thing before we move on, just want to point out like almost every planet has a religious name, like Comriad, Maui Covenant, Maui
Yeah.
being a god, like those are just the two that pop up here, but it happens over and over again that it's really obvious that people are still like they're not only carrying their religions into space, but it's so important to them that they name planets after their
Yeah,
gods.
the thing that gets Kassad notice is how he deals with the new prophet of Islam, right?
Hmm.
Like the incredibly fucked up way in which he just like targets each of them for individual death,
Yeah,
using I think it's X-rays from like from falling satellites or something, right? Like it's just so fucked up.
yeah, it just blows up their heads
Yeah,
simultaneously. It's
it's
great. I love it.
it's very new Bushido, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, I think you're right that religion is weaved in and out of every part of this society, this future society. Like even if they have new religions, they're usually all based in some form of old religion. We have Catholicism, we have Islam here. We're going to talk about Judaism with Sol Weintraub. And that's definitely intentional.
yeah, yep,
And the one big new religion, the religion of the Shrike, is human beings need to be extinct religion. So
yeah. And we actually have a manifestation of our God, which is an evil thing that murders and eviscerates people.
sounds like a cool dude.
Yeah, that's. I mean, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, we'll get to the Shrike.
Yeah, we will. All right, this next slide, the consul has finished a story. The consul was staring into, or sorry, not the consul. Kassad has finished his story. The consul was staring into his drink, but his head suddenly snapped upright with the force of a thought. Colonel, you said that you saw a vision of the Shrike's killing tree, the structure, the thing where it impales its victims. Kassad moved his basilisk stare from the Templar to the consul. He slowly nodded. And there were bodies on it? Another nod. The consul wiped sweat from his upper lip. If the tree is traveling backward in time with the time tombs, then the victims are from our future. Kassad said nothing. The others were also staring at the consul now, but only Weintraub appeared to understand what the comment meant and what the consul's next question had to be. The consul resisted the urge to wipe the sweat from his lip again. His voice was steady. Did you see any of us there? Kassad said nothing for more than a minute. The soft sounds of the river and the ship's rigging suddenly seemed very loud. Finally, Kassad took a breath. Yes. Silence stretched again. Braun Lamia broke it. Will you tell us who? No. Kassad rose and went to the stairway leading to the lower decks. Wait, called Father Hoyd. Kassad paused at the head of the stairway. Will you at least tell us 2 other things? What? Father Hoyt grimaced from a wave of pain. His gaunt face went white under its film of perspiration. He took a breath and said, "First, do you think the Shrike, the woman, somehow wants to use you to start this terrible interstellar war you foresaw?" "Yes," Cassad said softly. "Second, will you tell us what your plan to petition the strike for, or this Moneta, when you meet them on the pilgrimage?" Cassad smiled for the first time. It was a thin smile, and very, very cold. "I will make no petition," said Cassad. "I will ask nothing of them. When I meet them this time, I will kill them." So that's the end of the soldier story.
Yeah.
So there's a few things I wanted to talk to you about here, Matt.
Okay.
First of all, this idea that the central theme of his story is him chasing after this woman who he learns is Moneta, and how she appears to him basically every time he's like killing stuff. And this kind of decision that this is the Shrike encouraging him to be violent to help bring about violence. What is your thought on that?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't even actually know if what is the Shrike and what is the blank other thing that is working on people. I mean, it's clear that Moneta and the Shrike are on the same side, because when they get him to Hyperion, they do that thing where they all together murder all of the ouster soldiers who have landed. Although I don't. That was an interesting part, because I'm not even sure that was necessary. Like, why did the Shrike even need help? Like,
Yeah.
it seems like he could have just killed everything by himself. But I mean, and I don't mean that like rhetorically. Like I'm not saying it was an unnecessary scene necessarily. I'm just like, I don't understand anything about like, obviously someone is telepathically reaching out to him to try to coax him into a situation where he's going to come to Hyperion.
Yeah.
And basically, you know, you get the sense that everything that happens in this story is these grand forces lining up all these characters like billiard balls to make the ultimate trick shot, but you don't actually know what that is yet. I assume that was a sequel thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that you're absolutely right that the motivation behind the Shrike is mysterious and unknown, and the book doesn't answer that. But I mean, the whole thing with the pilgrimage is the Shrike gives you what you want, right? Like you make the pilgrimage, you go before it, and you ask it for anything you want, and it will give it to you. But here's the thing, Matt. The Shrike does that throughout the book anyway. Father Dure wants evidence of Christianity, of God, of faith. The Shrike gives him that. He gives him a crucifix that goes on his chest that gives him eternal life. It's a literalization of the idea of eternal life in Christianity. Cassad seems to be all about fighting and war, and he gets a thing that just encourages him, pushes him, like directs him to more fighting, to more war, to more destruction, to more death. Like, I love the part where he lands on Hyperion and Moneta says, "We have to go fight your enemies now," and they point at the ousters, and Cassad's like, "No, they're not my enemies anymore. I was just trying to get away from them." And she's like, "No, they're your. We have to kill them. They're your enemies." And he's just like, "Oh, okay," and he just goes and kills them all. So yeah, I mean, like, the Shrike is granting them the things that they seem to want throughout the story. Even Sol Weintraub, in kind of a trippy way, like, is their daughter being in their life is the most important thing to them, and the second she gets old enough to move away and leave them, time literally starts reversing so she can come back and stay with them. So I mean, it's kind of like an interesting monkey's paw, right?
Yeah, I love that. Like the poet that Shrike kills anyone who wants to stop him from working on his poem.
Yep.
And you also get the sense that the Shrike wants them to want these things, right? It's
Yeah.
not that they just want these things. It's that them wanting these things goes with its plan.
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of an inherent, not badness, but dangerousness to wanting the things they want so bad.
Yeah.
I mean, like Dure in Hoyt's story wanted people to believe in Christianity so bad that he lied. He broke one of the 10 Commandments to to kind of build a false narrative for them. So yeah, I mean, like it's feeding on people's kind of most innate and dangerous desire.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of the monkey's paw aspect of what the Shrike was doing
Yeah.
and who it was choosing to like when it was choosing to intervene. I think probably, as you pointed out, the most obvious application of that is that they he gives their daughter back to them, and that's like the only time that anything like the reverse aging thing is witnessed.
Right.
The other times it's usually just like killing someone. But
Right.
that time it's clearly like a specific metaphorical intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
which is a monkey, which is a horrible actual suffering gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So
Next.
we've jumped ahead a little bit. So let's move into those
Okay.
things we were just talking about.
All right. So we move on to the poet's tale, uh, the third story. Um, and here we have another kind of shift in the tone. The poet's tale, Hyperion Cantos. In the beginning was the word. Then came the fucking word processor. Then came the thought processor. Then came the death of literature. And so it goes. Francis Bacon once said, "There arises from a bad and unapt formation of words a wonderful obstruction to the mind." We have all contributed our wonderful obstructions to the mind, have we not? I more than most. One of the 20th century's better forgotten writers, that is, better, comma, forgotten, once bon moted. I love being a writer. It's the paperwork I can't stand. Get it? Well, amigos and amiguette, I love being a poet. It's the goddamn words I can't stand. Where to start? Start with Hyperion, perhaps? Fade in. Almost 2 standard centuries ago. Sad King Billy's 5 seed ships spin like gold dandelions above this all too familiar lapis sky. We land like conquistadors strutting to and fro, more than 2,000 visual artists and writers and sculptors and poets and artists and vid makers and holly directors and composers and decomposers and God knows what all, supported by 5 times that many administrators and technicians and ecologists and supervisors and corps chamberlains and professional ass kissers, not to mention the family of royal asses themselves, supported in turn by 10 times that many androids willing to till the soil and stoke the reactors and raise the cities and lift the bale and tote the load. Hell, you get the idea.
So I wanted to pull this just because I fucking love it. I don't think the Poet's Tale is my favorite of the stories, but I think the Poet's Tale is Simmons like flexing his tone shifting abilities to their maximum extent. Like this is the not just the type of writing and the tone of the writing, but the structure of the writing is so dramatically different from anything else he has done here. I mean, you can see how much personality he's instilling in these words, like how much of the poet we're getting through just even like explaining how Hyperion was seated, even this like the way he lists all these people and like and how it breaks down from like I love how we move from artists and writers and sculptors and poets, which are all things that you and I are familiar with, to ARNists. I don't know who vid makers. It's presumably like video like making movies or something. Holly directors and composers and decomposers. So we're just immediately going to the ironic there and God knows what all. Like I love how
Yeah.
this is structured. I love how we know immediately who the poet is, what type of person he is, how he writes. Like I love the fade in. We're doing stage directions. I love his like in this first little bit he quotes 2 people, and that like obsession with quoting other artists will continue throughout the entirety of his story. I just love it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've pointed out most of what there is to point out here. Yeah, this the amount of voice that is
Yeah.
carried in these chapters. And again, I have to commend the audiobook because the poet voice actor is just this like irascible, like he really gets across kind of this character, and it's like the most unforgettable character I think in the story. One element that we haven't really talked about, but which is kind of poked at a few times, is the fact that there are these like apparently sentient androids all over the place that are treated
Hmm.
like slaves,
Yeah.
and no one's bothered by this. Thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship to artificial intelligence in this story is very interesting. I think we'll get to that more when we get to the detective story for
Hmm.
obvious reasons. But yeah, I mean, the treatment of sentient life in this whole story is also a very interesting one, and as we'll learn very specifically later in the story as well, it is fascinating kind of how Simmons, I think, um, took what he saw in humanity and just like extended it out a few hundred years to where he thought it would go.
Hmm.
And he's got humans pretty pegged, which may sound more pessimistic than I meant it to, but I think he's got a pretty good handle on people.
Yeah, right. And I think that's one of the great things that science fiction can do is it's really talking about the human condition. It's not talking about the technology.
Right.
And that's what this book is doing.
Yeah, and the great thing that science fiction can do is kind of use a fictional future or science based past or whatever you want to call it. Use this kind of stuff as ways of discussing the world we live in. And I think more than anything, I think that's what the Poet's Tale does for me.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, and especially because I'm not sure if we're going to talk about this on the next slide or not. Doesn't look like it necessarily, but the fact that this guy is like the oldest human alive,
Yeah,
and like he doesn't date back to our era, but he does date back. He is like the only living human who was alive on Earth,
yeah.
which ties us to him in a certain way and makes him feel like an extension of us.
Yeah, I mean the concept of time debt in this world is something that is referenced a lot, but really not focused on until we get to the console story. But it is something that is fascinating, like the kind of how this faster than light travel kind of changes how aging and time and relative measurements of this stuff works is pretty fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, I like that it's woven throughout the story in ways that are always like believable and consistent. And but people have just kind of adapted to it.
And I think that's the secret weapon of the story. I think that's why these individual stories within this book work so well, is because each one focuses on a different part of the world. Like we've had religion, specifically faith focused on. We've had military. Here we're doing the creation of art, but as much as they're zooming in on one specific aspect of the world, they all like have this commonality to them. Stuff in one is mentioned or talked about in another, and it makes them, while they are separate, distinct stories, it ties them together through more than just the overarching like structure of it. It's more than just there are six people in the room telling these stories. It's like we're getting all the nuances and different things about this world that these people live in just through the interconnections of their stories, how they talk about different things, how one person references this thing but another person goes into detail on it makes it feel much more alive. It's much more than just six stories.
Yeah, I agree completely, which makes it so much odder that he chooses the story with that dump of nonsense words. Um, but yeah, no, I think
Yeah,
it's done really well.
yeah. All right, we're going to talk about the life of a poet. The life of a poet lies not merely in the finite language dance of expression, but in the nearly infinite combinations of perception and memory, combined with a sensitivity to what is perceived and remembered. My 3 local years on Heaven's Gate, almost 1,500 standard days, allowed me to see, to feel, to hear, to remember, as if I literally had been born again. Little matter that I had been born again in hell, reworked experience is the stuff of all true poetry, and raw experience was the birthing gift of my new life. There was no problem adapting to a brave new world a century and a half beyond my own. For all our talk of expansion and pioneering spirit these past 5 centuries, we all know how stulted and static our human universe had become. We are in a comfortable dark ages of the inventive mind. Institutions change but little, and that by gradual evolution rather than revolution. Scientific research creeps crab like in a lateral shuffle, where once it leaped in great intuitive bounds. Devices change even less. Plateau technologies common to us would be instantly identifiable and operable to our great grandfathers. So while I slept, the hegemony became a formal entity, the World Web was spun to something close to its final shape, the All Thing took its democratic place among the lists of humanity's benevolent despots, the Technocore seceded from human services and then offered its help as an ally rather than a slave, and the ousters retreated to the darkness and the role of nemesis. But all these things had been creeping toward critical mass even before I was frozen in my ice coffin between the pork bellies and sherbet, and such obvious extensions of old trends took little effort to understand. Besides, history viewed from inside is always a dark, digestive mess, far different from the easily recognizable cow view from afar by historians. So, first of all, I just love all the language here. Like, I loved pulling the poets sections because they're it's just such it's so much more purple than
Yeah.
any of the other characters.
Yeah. Purple and like sometimes I get the sense that the poet isn't as good as he thinks he is,
Yeah.
but that he's also kind of aware of that fact. And like he's capable of spurts of genius, but normally he's kind of full of it.
Yeah.
I just want to like talk about kind of his life story. It's so wonderfully like tragic because he was like an aristocrat on old Earth, like and like doted on, and his mom then like shipped him off because Earth was being destroyed by this accident, shipped him
Yeah.
off to like a nearby system, and she had this clever scheme where like when he arrived, the money she invested would be ready and he would be able to live like a king when he arrived. But then like the economy didn't work the way like it didn't continue to work the way it had worked, and so the money was worth nothing. And then he gets brain damage when he wakes up or when he's in his hypersleep or whatever, so he can't speak except for like swear words. And then he just has to live as like the lowest of the low, unable to speak in
Yeah.
this in on this hell planet for several years. And it's just like it actually kind of endears you to him a lot. It's a good writing trick to take a character who you may be ambivalent about or even slightly dislike because he's kind of a pill, and then just put him through hell, and it kind of makes you like him more.
Yeah. So how this is something we haven't really talked about yet, but at the very beginning of this thing, as we are getting ready to hear these stories, someone says, "Well, how will people know if they're telling a truth?" And the response is, "We won't. Won't that be fun?" Do you think some of this story is bullshit? Because I'm not saying there's any textual evidence to this, but it just seems so poetic, for lack of a better phrase. Like this rich aristocratic poet was trained by a master, and then everything was taken away from him, and he had to rebuild his sense of language and sense of the word from the slums of nothing. It just seems so like exactly the way a writer would write a romanticized version of their life. That part of me had trouble grabbing onto it as completely factual.
That hadn't occurred to me, but I think it probably is exactly what you said, which is a romanticized version of his life. So he's he's had all of these years, and he's obviously like a disappearing into his own navel type of introspective person who's just constantly rehashing the past and writing these like books of poetry about the past and totally
Yeah.
fixated on the past. So he would he would have reformulated his past into something epic, and I don't actually think that he's lying. I do think that it is couched as this like you said, like it's a narrative because no real life is a narrative, but we pick and choose and sculpt things so that we feel like our life is a narrative because our mind has to make sense of things. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And then of course before we move on, one of the other things I had to put up is again the story reminding us about how stagnant
Hmm.
existence is now. Like we this is the most explicitly defined version of this that we've seen in the story thus far, but the poet basically declares us in a comfortable dark ages of the inventive mind. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
I love this idea that like and we kind of learn why later on. We learn that the hegemony is kind of very closely controlling all this stuff, and that's why things aren't advancing. But you know, this idea that things aren't changing. I mean, like for us people that live in the 21st century, this idea that a piece of technology that I'm using today, my great grandfather would be able to identify and operate, is absurd.
Yeah.
It's like ridiculous. There's no way things are changing so much. And when Simmons wrote this in the 80s, like there were being huge leaps and bounds in technology too. Like he even says here that scientific research was going in great intuitive bounds. Like we were making so much progress, and this idea that he's painted a future where that just all kind of stopped. It just kind of died out. Like we plateaued, and nothing really changes anymore. We're just kind of stuck where we are, and it's a very like we talked about before, a not great view of humanity in the future. It's not the idealized version of our future that we want.
Yeah, it's like they got just enough technology to make these farcasters such that the hegemony could exert their will upon
Yeah.
everyone, and then they were like, all right, that's it. We don't want anyone else rocking this boat. I really like that he's really cleverly foreshadowed some things here because he's talking about how things are stagnant, and then he just throws in, yeah, and then the Technocore seceded and the ousters retreated, and it's like, yeah, I mean, those are just thrown in as being things that happened in the course of all this, but we later learn that the Technocore is like has a hand in all of this, and the ousters are they are actually in contrast to this idea of stagnation. They have been developing technology at a steady rate out in the darkness of deep space
Yeah.
for all this time. So like that's a I love that that's placed here. I'm glad that you kind of pulled this slide out so that I
Yeah.
had a chance to notice that because I obviously didn't notice it the first time because we didn't understand what the ousters really were yet.
Yeah. And we'll circle back to that around when we learn the truth of the ousters for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And what I think the book is kind of saying through that.
Yeah. Okay. So
But first, we have to see what Dan Simmons thinks about the world of publishing.
yeah, takes out his frustration. So yeah, here we go. You've earned Transline several billion marks, Martin. We will publish it. All I'm saying is that no one will buy it. You're wrong, I shouted. Not everyone recognizes fine poetry, but there are still enough people who read it to make it a bestseller. Tyrina did not laugh again, but her smile slashed upward in a twist of green lips. Martin, 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 she said. The population of literate people has been declining steadily since Gutenberg's days. By the 20th century, less than 2% of the people in the so-called industrialized democracies read even one book a year. And that was before the smart machines, data spheres, and user-friendly environments. By the Hegira, 98% of the hegemony's population had no reason to read anything. So they didn't bother learning how to. It's worse today. There are more than 100 billion human beings in the world web, and less than 1% of them bothers to hardfax any printed materia, much less read a book. The Dying Earth sold almost 3 billion copies, I reminded her. Mm-hmm, said Tyrina. It was the Pilgrim's Progress effect. The what? Pilgrim's Progress effect. In the Massachusetts colony of, what was it, 17th century old Earth, every decent family had to have a copy in the household. But, my heavens, no one had to read it. It was the same with Hitler's Mein Kampf or Stukatsky's Visions. Who was Hitler? I said. Tyrina smiled slightly. An old Earth politician who did some writing. Mein Kampf is still in print. Transline renews the copyright every 138 years.
Okay, so there are moments in this book where I think Simmons like steps on his soapbox a little too much. And this is one of those moments. I mean, I love this because I mostly agree with what he's saying here, but this is very clearly him just kind of ranting about the state of
Literacy. And,
literacy
yeah.
and yeah, and like how we consume things. And I mean, he's right. I guarantee that less than 2% of the people in the so-called industrialized democracies read even one book a year. I have no doubt that is actually a true statistic that he looked up as part of this rant, or that he just had on hand. But this gets, it's almost too much for me. It's almost pushing the boundaries. Like we're leaving a book and just like specifically being lectured. Which is
Yeah,
ironic because we're being lectured in the form of a book, so he's kind of preaching to the choir anyway.
it's true. Yeah, I mean, there are a few places in the book, and this is one of them where he says, like, in the 20th century, and you're like, I know that you're talking to me specifically now.
Right.
Like, which, like, sometimes it's fine, like, when they're talking about poets, because that kind of makes sense that, like, Keats or whatever would be known into the future if the conceit of the story is that he's actually this amazing guy.
Yeah.
But like, why would she know offhand the statistic about reading rates in the 20th century?
Well, I actually think, as much as, yeah, I was just making fun of this, I think that ties into this whole idea of a new Dark Ages and a flatlining of new culture and new technology and new things, so everything's just kind of stayed the same, that the references go back to our time because how much new culture has existed since then. Like the poet spends most of his time quoting people from the 18th century and the 19th century and the 20th century. Is that because Dan Simmons just didn't want to invent new poets that happened in the 21st century or the 22nd century? Or is it because culture has stagnated? Nothing new is being made anymore. And the things new being made are being made of just nostalgic look backs to old things.
That's a perfect point because yeah, I mean the poet, um, his whole claim to fame is that he wrote this book of poetry about Earth, which is this backward looking thing. It's
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's a great point. I love
And then he
that.
had to write 10 books about the dying Earth books,
Yeah,
which again I think is Simmons ranting about like beach fiction and just
yeah,
like quickly produced and pooped out beach fiction.
yeah.
Yeah.
Getting trapped by the incentives of the publishing business, which
Right.
is apparently the same in the far future.
Yeah. So what do you think about this Hitler comment?
Um, it's I want to say it's actually like a reference to the second Dune book, but not
That's
sure.
very specific.
Well, there's like a very similar moment in that book actually. Um,
I do love the idea of a backwards obsessed, culturally stagnant society who either doesn't know who Hitler is or sees him as an old Earth politician who did some writing. Who nothing else happened. And the interesting thing is, we still have Jewish people in this world. The Holocaust is referenced. Also, there's a second Holocaust referenced that they don't go into detail before, but they say the first and second Holocaust. So, presumably, something else really bad happened to Jewish people at some point in the future. But it strikes me like I don't know if he's just trying to make a joke here,
it,
or he's just commenting on how history kind of files down the edges of people.
yeah, well, I mean, it may just literally be. I mean, like many Americans know everything about what Hitler did, but don't know what Stalin did, even though Stalin killed more people. So like it's quite plausible that like the priorities of what's taught in school would just change. I mean, if you want to be really cynical about it, the reason why we teach all the horrors about what Hitler did is because then we get to look like the good guys who kicked his ass.
Yeah.
And the reason we don't tell the same story about Stalin is that we let Stalin persist for decades. And so,
Or perhaps it's just a hint that the hegemony is a fascist regime, so the the view of Mein Kampf and of Hitler is much um, like less negative than it is for us living today.
yeah, yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, because I mean it's still in print, Matt. They renew the copyright every
Right.
138 years.
So I think it definitely works as more than just a joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Now we are finishing up. So we finish up with. I didn't go into a lot of the Poet's Tale, where he goes to Hyperion and starts working on his magnum opus, the Hyperion Cantos, which he has decided is what causes the Shrike to appear. That him working on this thing, which again we have to monkey's paw it. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I don't want to speculate about the Shrike very much because it's just specifically not answered.
Yeah. Right. I agree. I mean, I think we've put a nail in the idea that we're not supposed to really be able to figure it out yet.
Right.
Um,
All right, but
yeah.
let's talk about the Scholar's Tale,
Okay.
which is my favorite of in this book, Matt. The Scholar's Tale: the river Lythe taste. The river Lythe's taste is bitter. Saul Weintraub and his wife Saria had enjoyed their life even before the birth of their daughter. Rachel made things as close to perfect as the couple could imagine. Saria was 27 when the child was conceived. Saul was 29. Neither of them had considered Polson treatments because neither of them could afford it. But even with such care, But even without such care, they looked forward to another 50 years of health. Both had lived their entire lives on Barnard's World, one of the oldest but least exciting members of the hegemony. Barnard's was in the web, but it made little difference to Saul and Saria, since they could not afford a frequent Farcaster travel and had little wish to go at any rate. Saul had recently celebrated his 10th year with Nightingale College, where he taught history and classical studies and did his own research on ethical evolution. Nightingale was a small school, fewer than 3,000 students, but its academic reputation was outstanding, and it attracted young people from all over the web. The primary complaint of these students was that Nightingale and its surrounding community of Crawford constituted an island of civilization in an ocean of corn. It was true. The college was 3,000 flat kilometers away from the capital of Bussard, and the terraformed land in between was given over to farming. There had been no forests to fell, no hills to deal with, and no mountains to break the flat monotony of the cornfields, bean fields, cornfields, wheat fields, cornfields, rice paddies, and cornfields. The radical poet Samud Brevi had taught briefly at Nightenhelser before the Glennon Height Mutiny, had been fired, and upon farcasting to the Renaissance vector, had told his friends that Crawford County on South Cinzer on Bernard's World constituted the eighth circle of desolation on the smallest pimple on the absolute ass end of creation. Saul and Saria Weintraub liked it. So I love the Scholar's Tale, and I want to focus on this opening because, like, I think Simmons goes out of his way to make their life, their existence, as quaint as possible, as different from everything else we've seen as possible. This is, I mean, he is a scholar, so this is someone who is intelligent and studies, but this is more of what life, what a normal, like, rural life in the future looks like, is what we're seeing here.
Yeah. Another very likable character. You're creating this peaceful introduction, which you know something horrible is going to happen. So that's one thing. As you're reading this, you're aware that something horrible is going to happen because he ends up on the Shrike pilgrimage. So and he has a baby with him, so that's weird. And here we hear about him having a daughter. So you start to put things together. I think it takes a while to put everything together, but yeah.
Yeah, and of course we open with we get an immediate reference to the River Lythe, which I believe is like the river of forgotten memories, right? Like it's, I think, in Greek mythology.
I'm not sure.
It's about forgetfulness and forgetting and lost memories. And it's never directly referenced in the story, but obviously when we learn what happens to Rachel and how her life is basically, it's 50 First Dates, the show. Like,
but
whoever wrote that movie just took that directly from this.
Right. But incremental,
kind of
and erasing gradually backwards in time, which is
it's like a worse version.
Yeah, it's so heart-wrenching.
It really is, and that's why, like, this is the story I emotionally connected to the most. And I'm not even a parent, so I can't imagine what it was like for you reading this, imagining like this happening to your child.
Yeah, I definitely was.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like this, and it makes you think a lot. I mean, and maybe this is, it almost felt like a callous thing to think, but I was like, it's like part of the reason why you have children, and what you imagine when you have a child is that you're creating this thing that's going to carry on something of you, and you're going to teach it, you're going to raise it, like all these words we have, like you raise a child, you get a child ready to go into the world for themselves. All of that is taken away from them because their daughter is not going to go out into the world. She has essentially what is a profound disability that is also a death sentence on top of that, where she's never going to be able to leave the house. In fact, every day is going to be a struggle of trying to basically broach the news to her of what's happening over and over again until they give up doing that entirely, and they just lie to her, which is also an understandable thing.
Yeah. And we use this terrible thing that's happening to their daughter and happening to their family to kind of once again talk about religion. Saul is Jewish, and he is kind of a lapsed Jew. They talk specifically about how identity as a Jewish individual is less important now that Earth is gone, and basically that you can identify as Jewish as you want. He hasn't been to synagogue in forever, and we kind of use what's happening to his daughter as a way of him kind of broaching the ethical nature of his faith very specifically.
Yeah,
which kind of moves us right into the next slides.
So here we have Saul dreaming this dream where this entity is demanding that his daughter be sacrificed, and Saul's story, much like Hoyt's, deals with religion a lot, but Saul's focus is more on ethics, which is fitting because he's an ethics professor.
Yeah.
Saul dreamed that he was wandering through a great structure with columns the size of small redwood trees and a ceiling lost to sight far above him, through which red light fell in solid shafts. At times he caught glimpses of things far off in the gloom to his left or right, Once he made out a pair of stone legs rising like massive buildings through the darkness. Another time he spied what appeared to be a crystal scarab rotating far above him, its insides ablaze with cool lights. Finally, Saul stopped to rest. Far behind him, he could hear what sounded like a great conflagration, entire cities and forests burning. Ahead of him glowed the lights he had been walking toward, two ovals of deepest red. He was mopping up sweat from his brow when an immense voice said to him, Saul, take your daughter, your only daughter Rachel, whom you love, and go to the world called Hyperion, and offer her there as a burnt offering at one of the places of which I shall tell you. And in his dream Saul had stood and said, You can't be serious. And he had walked on through the darkness, the red orbs glowing now like bloody moons hanging above an indistinct plain. And when he stopped to rest, the immense voice said, Saul, take your daughter, your only daughter Rachel, whom you love, and go to the world called Hyperion, and offer her there as a burnt offering at one of the places when I shall tell you. And Saul had shrugged off the weight of the voice and had said distinctly into the darkness, I heard you the first time. The answer is still no.
Oh boy. So this gets into the idea of, and we'll talk about this more in the second slide, but of the test of Abraham and the sacrifice of an innocent, and religion and the ethics of it. And this dream happens the night that Rachel's accident happens, and the book almost implies that his refusal here is what like triggers what happens to Rachel. So what is your take on this?
So the element where he is struggling with this idea of God demanding a sacrifice of his child, of a man's child, and how that is basically an unethical thing to do, no matter how you couch it. Like because he basically refutes the idea that, like, well, God would have just not. He wouldn't have made him go through with it, and he's like, it doesn't matter. It's still an unethical thing to ask. I loved all of this, and this was actually what I mentioned at the top of the podcast, where I was gonna say something that I wish had been wrapped up, and it's like I wanted there to be an answer to this. Like I wanted the book to tell me what Simmons is saying about what the right choice is, what the right choice was here. Like, and maybe the answer is, well, like, you're asking too much. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and that's actually the truth of it. But I don't know. I feel like he's building to something with all this.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and jump right into the next slide, because I
Okay.
think that moves it's difficult to talk about this all without talking about both of these slides. Saul wanted to know how any ethical system, much less a religion so indomitable that it had survived every evil mankind could throw at it, could flow from a command from a god for a man to slaughter his son. It did not matter to Saul that the command had been rescinded at the last moment. It did not matter that the command was a test of obedience. In fact, the idea that it was the obedience of Abraham which allowed him to become the father of all tribes of Israel was precisely what drove Saul into fits of fury. After 55 years of dedicating his life and work to the story of ethical systems, Saul Weintraub had come to a single unshakable conclusion. Any allegiance to a deity or concept or universal principle which puts obedience above decent behavior towards an innocent human being was evil. So define innocence, came the vaguely amused, faintly querulous voice which Saul associated with these arguments. A child is innocent, thought Saul. Isaac was. Rachel is. Innocent by the mere fact of being a child? Yes. And there's no situation where the blood of the innocent must be shed for a greater cause. No, thought Saul. None. But the innocent are not restricted to children, I presume. Saul hesitated, sensing a trap, trying to see where his subconscious interlocutor was heading. He could not. No, he thought, the innocent includes others as well as children. Such as Rachel. At age 24, the innocent should not be sacrificed at any age? That's right. Perhaps this is part of the lesson which Abraham needed to learn before he could be father to the blessed of the nations of the earth. What lesson, thought Saul. What lesson? But the voice in his mind had faded, and now there were only the sounds of night birds outside and the soft breathing of his wife beside him. So I think he's as frustrated with the lack of resolution as you are. What lesson? What lesson could this be?
Yeah, because the book is clearly asking us to think about it and
Right.
to perhaps try to answer what that might be. But I mean, and you can think about it, and it is actually fun to think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, approximately one thing you can end up at is like sometimes bad things just happen to good people,
Right.
which is not very satisfying, but is actually true, unfortunately. But I want to know what Simmons was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, like personally, like as a person who was raised Catholic, I have always struggled with the idea of the Old Testament God who tests people in ways like this. That the
Hmm.
test of Abraham, the torture of Job. These are things that I've always wrestled with from an ethical perspective because, and I think Saul makes some great points here that it doesn't matter if God was not going to actually let Abraham do it. In the moment before Abraham was told to stop, he believed with every fiber in his being that his God was asking him to kill his son and had made the decision to do it. So just because the request is rescinded at the last minute and he doesn't actually have to do it, it still means I wanted to believe that you were willing to do that with no questions. No like I've always wrestled with that
Yeah.
a human. Like this idea, like it's it's it seems like a really fucked up thing. Like I kind of end up at a very similar place that Saul is at.
Yeah, me too. Just this idea that obedience is more important than he uses decent behavior, but really it's just like being not evil. Like
Yeah,
it would be evil to sacrifice your son for any reason. It doesn't matter if it's your God asking for it. You should just be
right.
able to be like, well, I guess I have to go to hell now. Like like that to me would be like the good way to respond to that. I don't know. Um, but that's probably, but yeah, I have a hard time
Yeah,
connecting to that as being a moral good.
but I think Simmons recognized like the inherent complexities of this argument though, because I think the only way I can find a way towards this makes sense is in that final argument that the disembodied querulous voice makes. Perhaps this is part of the lesson which Abraham needed to learn before he could be father to the blessed of the nations of the earth. That he needed to learn that the innocent should not be sacrificed by being told to sacrifice an innocent.
Yeah, and being willing to,
Yeah,
and then God not telling him like, actually, that was really bad, and you shouldn't have
yeah.
listened to
You
me. And
shouldn't. Yeah.
God
What'd you
was
do
actually
that
like,
for?
good job. You don't have to actually do it, but good job.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. But I mean, I think this is such a relatable thing because like I think parents watching their children suffer turn to things like this a lot. Like I think um, especially in a world where like you maybe you're not like super religious but you have some religious belief, you have like you were religious at one point, and then like people tend to turn to religion when bad stuff happens in their world as comfort. And what Saul is here is he's turning to religion as the opposite of comfort, as like how could you let this happen?
yeah, yeah. David in the chat says, "How do you think Abraham would have judged God if God would have let him murder his own child?" Um, I think like what's funny is that there's like how I would have reacted, and then there's how Abraham would have reacted, and I think if you take the story at face value, Abraham would have just been like, "All right, I I sacrificed my son.
Yeah,
That I'm kind of sucks that I had to do that, but I guess you're God." But
yeah,
like to like for me, like my ethics are like Jean-Luc Picard's ethics. So I would have been like, this is a monstrosity. Like what have you done? This is evil, So I mean it's not, you can't reach back across thousands of years and relate to people quite so
yeah.
easily, I think.
I mean, I think the lesson of the story is you should be obedient to me, but I will never ask you to actually do something as terrible as this, right? Um, I guess.
Maybe.
So I mean, I don't think there's ever a situation in which like the God of this story or just God, if you believe in him, would have actually made him do that. Like, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It's like I like that the book doesn't have an easy answer, and I think this is one of those things that I think Simmons is just genuinely wrestling with himself. Is like this like the eternal question of why do bad things happen to good people, is one that I don't think religion has ever been able to adequately answer for me, and I don't think those things are adequately answered by for Simmons either.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things he's exploring. And perhaps we are being set up. Perhaps this is going to pay off in a really interesting way in the next one. But you're right. We are kind of left with just this non-answer where he's driven to Hyperion. He's basically doing what this disembodied voice in his dream was demanding he do. But it's not like in a measure of choice. It's in a measure of desperation. It's like she's going to die, and perhaps this is the only way to stop it. So it's almost the reverse. It's like, you're going to take her from me, so I'm going to where you told me to stop you from doing that.
Right. Yeah. He at no point does he bend in his conviction.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So the next slide, we move on to the next character, which is the detective. She tells her tale, and we have yet another stylistic shift. The detective's tale, The Long Goodbye. We immediately know what subgenre we're getting into. I knew the case was going to be special the minute that he walked into my office. He was beautiful. By that I don't mean effeminate or pretty in the male modeled HGV star mode, merely beautiful. He was a short man, no taller than I, and I was born and raised on Luss's 1.3G field. It was apparent in a second that my visitor was not from Lussus. His compact form was well proportioned by Webb standards, athletic but thin. His face was a study in purposeful energy. Low brow, sharp cheekbones, compact nose, solid jaw, and a wide mouth that suggested both a sensuous side and a stubborn streak. His eyes were large and hazel-colored. He looked to be in his late 20s standard. Understand, I didn't itemize all this in the moment he walked in. My first thought was, is this a client? My second thought was, shit, this guy's beautiful. M. Lamia? Yeah. M. Braun Lamia of All Web Investigations? Yeah. He looked around as if he didn't quite believe it. I understood that look. My office is on the 23rd level of an old industrial hive in the old digs section of Iron Pig on Lussus. I had 3 big windows that look out on Service Trench 9, where it's always dark and always drizzling thanks to a massive filter drip from the hive above. The view is mostly of abandoned automated loading docks and rusted girders. What the hell? It's cheap. Most of my clients call rather than show up in person.
Matt, this should be my favorite story of the book, because it's just like detective noir. It's out the ass.
Yeah, but it's fun. It's inverted because instead of the beautiful woman walking into the man's office, it's beautiful man walking into the woman's office. But no, I love this the second to last paragraph here, where it just perfectly paints this image of this place as just being horrible. Old industrial hive, Iron Pig, Service Trench 9, like everything just sucks.
Yeah, and it's constantly raining. Like it's like taking the noir aesthetic and literalizing it. Like it's always dark and constantly raining.
Yeah.
which is just a stylistic choice, but no, here it's just the reality. This, like, the what I love about this, I think this opening is perfect. It is absolutely Simmons channeling this detective noir story where you can like hear the music and I can see the office and like I see it all. And I was so excited about this. And it just doesn't go anywhere interesting to me. I think this is my least favorite story, and I think it's probably because this story is the one mostly connected with the overarching plot of the book and less a personalized story. Like, if you break it down to personality-wise, this is kind of a love story between Braun and Johnny, this guy who turns out is like a cybernetic android. I forgot what they called him, like a
Cybrid.
Yeah, there you go, Cybrid. It's like a story of their love and her trying to help this lost man, but it's so kind of like placed in the middle of so much other stuff that we're exploring that it just becomes overwhelming. It's like he felt
Yeah.
like we're approaching the climax of the novel, so I need to start bringing in plot moving devices, and I just don't think it works. I think it loses track. It stops feeling like a noir story to me at
Yeah.
one point in it, and that just bummed me out.
It's doing too much groundwork. It's
Yeah,
like I can't tell you what happens in this part of the story, and that's not true of most of the others. Like I
yeah,
know that they chase somebody's following him. Somebody killed his former body. They're chasing him. They break into the cyber core.
yeah.
Um, I don't remember what they learn in the cyber core. I don't remember. I could probably remember if I thought about it for a few minutes, but
Well,
like,
here, I mean, here's what it is. I can tell it to you in one sentence. Here's the mystery of the detective story. Johnny wants to become human and go to Hyperion. That's it.
yeah, but they don't want him to because,
No, they
yeah,
killed him and erased that want
yeah,
from him for reasons we don't really understand.
yeah. I think that's part of the problem. Is if it's a noir detective story, then we don't get the part of the noir detective story where they figure out what's going on and it's satisfying.
Yeah,
It's just the part where everything's still confused and chaotic, and they haven't even found the clues that are necessarily going to solve the mystery.
yeah.
So,
It's
yeah,
just it's so disappointing. Maybe I just set myself up for failure because the minute I like turned to this page, I was like, yes, yes, this is so exciting. I'm so excited about this, and it never got to where I wanted it to.
yeah,
And Daniel says Space Detroit.
yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I had the same reaction in terms of being like psyched about it, but I did have the same reaction in terms of being let down. Like, and so like the two action parts that I was bored by were the lengthy sequence where Kassad is escaping from the medical ship and so forth, and the part where Bron Lamia is chasing a guy through a whole bunch of web portals, which like
Oh, that went on for
it,
so
it
long.
I think that's the thing is that these are actually really cool set pieces. Like if I were to describe them, they're really cool and imaginative, but they just go on like they're kind of the same thing for many more pages than you're able to be patient
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, and I mean, like that the thing that set piece takes place in matters so little to the overarching plot of the story. Like Kassad surviving there was just the in the end it was just he survived.
Hmm.
Like accident happened, he survived and crash landed on Hyperion. In this one, it's she catches up to the guy and he self destructs,
Right.
and that's it. Like he was a guardian, I guess, for him, but also to like yeah, it's just not interesting.
Yeah.
And I really wanted it to be because there are parts of this I really do like. Like I said, I liked the opening. I really like this part on the next slide when they're talking about the idea of him being this person that was created based off another personality.
Yeah, no, it's a really fun idea. Again, there's a lot going on in this story. There's almost too much.
Yeah,
And I mean, I think the idea of there not being enough stakes in some parts of the story is definitely true here because like you said, the stakes of her chase through all the web portals are non-existent because, well, okay, they're not non-existent. It's just that you don't understand what they are,
yeah,
and that's kind of the same for much of this story. Like you don't, she's just solving a case, right? Like she's just like, oh, I'm just gonna solve a case and maybe get paid. That's the stakes as far as the
yeah.
character is concerned. That's the stakes.
And I never felt like the transition. I didn't feel like the emotional connection to her falling in love with this guy worked for me. I think
Yeah,
it just happened. It was like, okay, it's time for the part of the book where she falls in love with the it feels like he was kind of, maybe he wasn't as comfortable in the noir set, so he was just checking boxes instead, like, it's just like, okay, now they have to fall in love because that's what happens next. I don't know. I never felt like that relationship was believable, and it's like the linchpin of the entire thing is that you believe this relationship between them.
yeah, I agree. I would even go so far as to say that a lot of the love and romance and sex stuff in this book is a bit cringy. Um, the stuff with Kassad and the woman too.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, I get it. um,
Though I at least understand why the consuls love stuff is a bit weird because it's the nature of their relationship and the time difference makes it that way.
Yeah, well,
But
and that one, the cringiness is actually addressed,
yeah.
and is kind of part of it. Whereas the other ones, it's like, well, it's you just kind of feel like you're reading Dan Simmons being cringy.
That's fair.
So,
All right, this next slide, we deal with Johnny and his existence as Keats.
okay.
Tell me. What? Johnny's skin was very pale in the gloom. His short curls looked black. What it was like to die. What it was like to be reborn. Johnny told me, his voice very soft, almost melodic, lapsing sometimes into an English too archaic to be understood, but far more beautiful to the ear than the hybrid tongue we speak today. He told me what it was like to be a poet obsessed with perfection, far harsher toward his own efforts than even the most vicious critic. And the critics were vicious. His work was dismissed, ridiculed, described as derivative and silly. Too poor to marry the woman he loved, loaning money to his brother in America and thus losing the last chance of financial security, and then the brief glory of growing into the full maturation of his poetic powers, just as he fell prey to the consumption which had claimed his mother and his brother Tom. Then sent off to exile in Italy, reputedly for his health, while knowing that all the while it meant a lonely, painful death at the age of 26. He talked of the agony of seeing Fanny's handwriting on the letters he found too painful to open. He talked of the loyalty of the young artist Joseph Severn, who had been chosen as a traveling companion for Keats by friends who had abandoned the poet at the end, of how Severn had nursed the dying man and stayed with him during the final days. He told of the hemorrhages in the night, of Dr. Clark bleeding him and prescribing exercise and good air, and of the ultimate religious and personal despair which had led Keats to demand his own epitaph be carved in stone as, "Here lies one whose name was writ in water." Only the dimmest light from below outlined the tall windows. Johnny's voice seemed to float in the night-scented air. He spoke of awakening after his death in the bed where he died, still attended by loyal Severn and Dr. Clark, of remembering that he was the poet John Keats, the way one remembers an identity from a fast-fading dream, while all the while knowing that he was something else. So this goes on like this for a while, and I couldn't pull it all because it was just too long. But the cruelty of what they did to this person, like everything after he died is basically a constructed lie to him to keep him from going insane, but he kind of goes insane anyway and only finds himself at the other end of this terrible, cruel thing that they went through with him. But I think it's interesting how this, like, so John Keats is this poet that is very important to the story in general. Hyperion is the name of a poem. It's also the name of the book and the planet that we spend most of our time on. Keats is the main city on this planet, but I haven't like been able to get to like the why of this, Matt, and that's where I'm struggling. And maybe it's just again because we're part one of two.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly probably should have gone and read up on Keats a bit more, and maybe even read Hyperion to try to understand why everything revolves around Keats and what Keats represents in the story. But I didn't do that, so I don't have anything smart to say there.
You shouldn't have to though.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess it would make sense for the book to tell us a little bit more about Keats if the book wants us to know about Keats. But yeah, just it's a great science fiction idea that they just like basically for fun made this guy who thinks he's a poet and the idea that all these cybrids like go insane, and it's like, oh yeah, well that's because anyone would go insane if they thought that they were like someone who had died a long time ago and was being resurrected just for fun. Like it's completely
Yeah.
disorienting and makes you question everything about existence, especially
Yeah.
someone like Keats.
Yeah, and I think I like how the book has slowly and steadily over the course of it like revealed the darker sides of the hegemony. They're this organization that we know nothing about at the beginning, but we know our main character is a consul of them, and then slowly throughout the book we learn more about like the shady stuff they did and are involved in, and the big thing we learn in this section of the story is all about the artificial intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
and how they run everything pretty much like they
Right.
seceded from humanity. Like I think this is a very interesting view on AI and what would happen in a like almost a real world situation, right? Where eventually they would just say, "Fuck you, go away.
Yeah.
But would also be like, oh wait, we need each other. Let's just redefine the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of just the classical what probably will actually happen with AI, which is
Yeah.
that they decide they don't need us, but they don't actually need to just kill us all immediately. So they just kind of use us for their purposes, and then they kill us all when it's convenient.
Yeah, which seems to be the way we're going with this, right? Like at first when I read this, I was like, oh look, a non-malevolent AI that's
Hmm.
just going to exist to the side of us, and it seems like no, they're just playing a really long game of chess,
Yeah,
and that the wipeout of humanity is going to come eventually. I mean,
right.
you could even go so far as to say that the idea of the Shrike and Hyperion itself is something that was created by this artificial intelligence group as a destruction of humanity, and the reason why they wanted to keep people away from it for so long was to lead to this extinction event.
Yeah,
But that's nothing. There's nothing specific to that in this book, at least.
yeah. No, I think that I think that you can say that the only reason the AIs haven't wiped out humanity already is fill in the blank with time travel.
Yeah,
Um, and because there's really no other reason within the story.
sure, sure.
And the fact that this time travel thing exists in the story opens up a lot of opportunities for um, making excuses. um,
It's true.
yeah. So, all right.
Daniel asks, "Do you think an AI can delete itself?" In
Uh,
theory,
if you program it right,
yeah.
generally not, because then it would not be able to achieve its goals, and if it has goals, it will want to achieve them. All right. Next. So now we move on.
This is post after Bronze story.
Okay. So we're on 18. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. One more story to tell. He looked at the consul. The consul had been twisting his slip of paper with the number 7 scrawled on it. He licked his lips. What's the purpose? The purpose of the pilgrimage has been destroyed already. The others stirred. What do you mean? Asked Father Hoyt. The consul crumpled the paper and threw it into a corner. For the Shrike to grant a request, the band of pilgrims must constitute a prime number. We had 7. Mastine's disappearance reduces us to 6. We go to our deaths now with no hope of a wish being granted. Superstition, said Lamia. The consul sighed and rubbed his brow. Yes, but that is our final hope. Father Hoyt gestured toward the sleeping infant. Can't Rachel be our 7th? Saul Weintraub rubbed his beard. No, a pilgrim must come to the tombs of his or her own free will. But she did once, said Hoyt. Maybe it qualifies. No, said the consul. Martin Silenus has been writing notes on a pad, but now he stood had been writing notes on a pad, but now he stood and paced the length of the room. Jesus Christ, people, look at us. We're not 6 fucking pilgrims, we're a mob. Hoyt there with his cruciform, carrying the ghost of Paul de Rey, our semi-sentient erg in the box there, Colonel Cassad with his memory of Moneta, and Braun there, if we were to believe her tale, carrying not only an unborn child, but a dead romantic poet, our scholar with the child his daughter used to be, me with my muse, the consul with whatever fucking baggage he's brought brought to this insane trek. My God, people, we should have received a fucking group rate for this trip. I love it.
So yeah, so this is Selenius being funny again, but I think it also serves as to kind of draw out what all these people have in common, right? That what the summary of this book kind of spoiled. That each one of them is carrying something with them, is carrying, whether it is a physical person or the memory of a person, or they're all bringing baggage. They're all kind of broken people. And I mean, that's why the idea of a pilgrimage is so thematically fitting, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's kind of saying that we're all carrying burdens, and those burdens are other people very often.
Yeah.
I mean, usually it's memories about people and events,
Yeah.
but they take physical form here.
But I love like this requirement to have a prime number of people, like this superstition that everyone, like, so much of the pilgrimage itself is the same kind of faith and or ethical and or
Hmm.
spiritual thing that they've been dealing with the whole time, and like it's just moving from kind of one faith idea to another, and putting all their baskets into this thing where they're not even sure. Like, I think the interesting thing is each person's story. There's a very clear, this is the thing that I want, um, but it is also most often like not the thing that they need at all.
Hmm.
And I find that interesting.
Yeah, right. The reason why they're going to Hyperion is usually um, not what would actually fulfill them or make them happy or provide the resolution that they need.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I think that's a great point.
yeah. All right. Now we move in to the final tale of the story, the consul's tale, titled "Remembering Siri." Don't. I hope my phone doesn't make a noise. This is gonna be risky. I climb the steep hill to Siri's tomb on the day the islands return to the shallow seas of the Equatorial Archipelago. The day is perfect, and I hate it for being so. The sky is as tranquil as tales of old Earth seas. The shallows are dappled with ultramarine tints, and a warm breeze blows in from the sea to ripple the russet willow grass on the hillside near me. Better low clouds than gray gloom on such a day. Better mist or a shrouding fog which sets masts in Fireside Harbor, dripping, dripping and I don't know what that word is. And raises the lighthouse horn from its slumbers. Better one of the great sea simoons blowing up out of the cold belly of the south, lashing before it the motile isles and their dolphin herders until they seek refuge in the lee of our atolls and stony peaks. Anything would be better than this warm spring day when the sun moves through a vault of sky so blue that it makes me just want to run, to jump in great loping arcs, and to roll in the soft grass as Siri and I have done at just the spot. Just this spot. I pause to look around. The willow grass bends and ripples like the fur of some great beast as the salt-tinged breeze guts up out of the south. I shield my eyes and search the horizon, but nothing moves there. Out beyond the lava reef, the sea begins to chop and lift itself in nervous strokes. Siri, I whisper. I say her name without meaning to do so. 100 meters down the slope, the crowd pauses to watch me and to catch its collective breath. The procession of mourners and celebrants stretches for more than a kilometer to where the white buildings of the city began. I can make out the gray and balding head of my younger son in the vanguard. He is wearing the blue and gold robes of the hegemony. I know that I should wait for him, walk with him, but he and the other aging council members cannot keep up with my young ship-trained muscles and steady stride. But decorum dictates that I should walk with him and my granddaughter Lyra and my 9-year-old grandson. To hell with it, and to hell with them. So, okay, the consul's story is fascinating to me. This slide specifically, I love how much time we spend to kind of paint a picture of the beauty of this world, the natural beauty of this world, all these different beautiful things. We talk about the dolphin herders of these like moving islands that are herded by dolphins. There's like beautiful grass. There's a lava reef. There's like this seems to be like such an untouched, natural, beautiful world, and I think that's very intentional and deliberate because this is a story. This is kind of Simmons being an environmentalist.
Yeah,
The story.
yeah. This story is so several things are going on with this story. So first of all, the consul story is this guy's story, but this guy's story is Siri's story.
Right.
And so we're getting like we're pushing what we've done with, like for example, where the priest's story was actually Father Duray's story, but in this case it's another level removed, even where we don't even actually understand what this story is about until the end, when it's all kind of shown to have been a not quite a ruse, but that the guy telling the story has just missed everything that's actually happening under the surface. And finally we're on Maui Covenant, which has been foreshadowed up to for all this time. We have the dolphins, which have been mentioned a few times. And of course this thing that's been led up to, we had this element of the people, not literally time traveling, but effectively, becoming unstuck in time due to the relativity effects and the hypersleep and everything. We have this guy who is much younger than his children, due
Yeah.
to that effect.
And I love how the story broaches that, right?
Hmm.
Like like up until this point in the story, we don't know who this person is. We have no idea. And then we see the gray balding head of my younger son in the Vanguard. And then you immediately go, okay, well, he's old. If his son is gray and balding, then he's a really old dude. But then the aging council members cannot keep up with my young ship trained muscles. And then you're kind of thrown for a loop. And then your brain goes exactly where Simmons wants you to, where it says, oh, we're finally dealing with like the interpersonal consequences of this travel and this time debt stuff. We've talked about the consequences like broadly with the poet, right? He's a guy that's been alive over the span of 4 centuries. But we've never really focused on what this means for the person to person interactions. And that's what the story does. We have these two people that for him it is 5 years, for her it is a lifetime.
Hmm.
And I think that's really cool because like that's exactly like the first time I see this introduction of this concept of time debt, that's where immediately where my brain goes, where to the like the interpersonal consequences of that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
I like that Simmons kind of holds that till the very end because I think he wants us to have a really good understanding of what this world is and how this world functions before he broaches this pretty complex subject.
Yeah, it's almost like a twist, even though it's been foreshadowed. Like it's funny how it does. I agree completely. Like it hits you emotionally when you realize, like, oh, this is that thing that's happening, and you
Yeah.
you immediately understand what it's going to mean and kind of what you're in for.
Yeah. Yeah. All
Yep.
right. Do we want
So
to move on to the into
yep.
the story?
So here, Siri, his lover, is questioning him. She's old now, so they started being together when she was very young, actually.
Yeah.
But now she's
Little
elderly.
little little too young, Dan.
Yeah,
19 and 15. I don't know, Dan.
yeah, yeah. It's the culture. It's the culture of the place. So Siri's questioning him, and he is an idiot and doesn't understand the implications of what she's saying. What will happen after they open the Farcaster? You know what the council says, Siri. I spoke loudly because she was hard of hearing in one ear. It will open a new era of trade and technology for Maui Covenant, and you won't be restricted to one little world any longer. When you become citizens, everyone will be entitled to use the Farcaster doors. Yes, said Siri. Her voice was weary. I have heard all that, Marin. But what will happen? Who will be the first through to us? I shrugged. More diplomats, I suppose. Cultural contact specialists, anthropologists, ethnologists, marine biologists. And then? I paused. It was dark out, the sea almost gentle. Our running lights glowed red and green against the night. I felt the same anxiety I had known 2 days earlier when the wall of storm appeared on the horizon. I said, and then will come the missionaries, the petroleum geologists, the sea farmers, the developers. Siri sipped at her coffee. I would have thought your hegemony was far beyond a petroleum economy. I laughed and locked the wheel in. Nobody gets beyond a petroleum economy. Not while there's petroleum there. We don't burn it, if that's what you mean, but it's still essential for the production of plastics, synthetics, food base, and keroids. 200 billion people use a lot of plastic. And Maui Covenant has oil? Oh, yes, I said. There was no more laughter in me. There are billions of barrels reservoired under the equatorial shallows alone.
So
Um,
this guy's an idiot.
yep. She's she's like, so yeah. I mean, the setup here is that their planet is of two minds. Let's say about the idea of joining the webway. He kind of represents the outer world, and she's basically just trying to get information. Like
Yeah.
you almost have to wonder. Like I think she does have affection for him, but also I think that she's like an agent who's manipulating him.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like they become famous, right? Like
Hmm.
their tale of the love between an outside guy and this local girl becomes famous on the planet. So every time they meet, which is I think only 6 times throughout her lifetime, is like a big event on the planet. On like the start of the story is the 7th reunion, they call it, where she's passed away, and like she had died before. She had died earlier, but there are still huge crowds of people just to see him see her.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's she like it you could almost argue it as a tool. And I don't want to take away her love for him. I think you're right that on some level she does love him, but he is absolutely a tool for her in this whole thing. And she's getting information and planning things and being pretty forthright about it. Like there's a part after this where she says, "What would happen if the Farcaster was blown up?"
Right. Yeah. Which, I mean, she can't know she can't know that he's going to carry on the mantle. I think
Right.
maybe she hopes that he will. And what's actually kind of redeeming about his character is that he actually did value her enough that he just throws away his old life entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because the structure of the story is kind of he walks into the tomb and sees the diary entries that she left for him, and she's deleted all but the ones that really just make the hegemony seem terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But then he's already planted the bomb anyway, so it's not like that was the final thing that convinced him that he should take her side. He had already made that decision even before he sees the thing she left for him in the tomb. So I wonder
That's a
when
good
he
point.
made that decision.
Yeah, I forgot about that detail. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to think about that.
But yeah, I mean, it's the theme of this story, or the recurring thing, is that he's kind of dumb and naive, and he sees himself as this super educated off-worlder, and because he's part of the of like civilized society with all this technology, that he knows better than this simple off-world kind of rural girl who doesn't know anything. And the reality, of course, is the exact opposite, that not only just because of she seems smarter and more perceptive, but like she's lived longer. Like that's the weird thing about this time debt stuff, is she is a wise person at this point. He thinks he still sees her as the 15-year-old girl he met, because it's only been 5 years since then, but she's lived an entire life worth of experiences, and he completely devalues that many times throughout his portion of the story.
Right. Yep.
And that's the wonkiness with all this time travel stuff. Or it's not really time travel, but the time messiness.
Yeah, he actually gets it in the end, though.
Yeah, he does. He finally does. And he blows up the ring and starts the war, and all the things that we've been told happened because of this guy. And then, of course, at the end of the story, we learn that the consul is the descendant of this man. I think he's his grandfather, right?
I think so.
Yeah. And then, so the consul, finishing that story, tells the story of his life, where he has hated the hegemony the entire time and has been slowly plotting against them by becoming a powerful consul in their own government. And he basically becomes a quadruple agent.
Yeah.
At least more than a double agent by far.
Yeah.
Which brings us to this slide, where we finally like learn about the ousters. I will not try to describe the beauty of life in a swarm. Their zero-gravity globe cities and comet farms and thrust clusters, their micro-orbitable forests and migrating rivers, and the 10,000 colors and textures of life at Rendezvous Week. Suffice it to say that I believe the ousters have done what web humanity has not done in the past millennia. Evolved. While we lived in our derivative cultures, pale reflections of old Earth life, the ousters have explored new dimensions of aesthetics and ethics and biosciences and art and all the things that must change and grow to reflect the human soul. Barbarians, we call them, while all the while we timidly cling to our web like Visigoths crouching in the ruins of Rome's faded glory and proclaim ourselves civilized. Within 10 standard months, I had told them my greatest secrets, and they had told me theirs. I explained in all the detail I could, what plans for extinction had been laid out for them by Gladstone's people. I told them what little the web scientist understood of the anomaly of the time tombs, and revealed the Technocore's inexplicable fear of Hyperion. I described how Hyperion would be a trap for them if they dared attempt to occupy it, how every element of force will be brought to Hyperion's system to crush them. I revealed everything I knew and waited once again to die. Instead of killing me, they told me something. They showed me the Fat Line intercepts, tight beam recordings, and their own recording records from the date they fled Old Earth system 4.5 centuries earlier. Their facts were terrible and simple. The big mistake of 38 had been no mistake. The death of Old Earth had been deliberate, planned by elements of the Techno Core and their human counterparts in the fledgling governments of the hegemony. The Hygira had been planned in detail decades before the runaway black hole had, accidentally, been plunged into the heart of Old Earth. The World Web, the All Thing, the hegemony of man, all of them were built on the most vicious type of patricide. So the truth of the real bad guy is revealed. And when I was pulling the slide, Matt, one big thing jumped out at me, and the thing I really want to talk to you a lot. The Ousters have explored new dimensions of aesthetics and ethics and biosciences and art and all the things that must change and go to reflect the human soul. So this is a pretty nice summary of every type of person we've seen before, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have the ethical guy, we have the artist, we have these are the people, these are the stories that have been told, and they're stories that each and every one of them is couched and connected to the old ways, to references. Like even the military guy is learning in training from a war that is from Old Earth. The priests are worshiping Old Earth religions. The Saul is obsessed with Old Earth ethical calculations. The poet is all his success is based on this is a society, and all these stories and everything is totally based in this Old Earth obsession. An Old Earth that was intentionally destroyed. They killed the very thing that they are obsessed with, and the only people that have grown and evolved beyond that are these people that they have labeled as barbarians.
Yeah, it's awesome. I like that he has kept us just distant enough from the Ousters and just enough like in our characters' heads that we haven't really asked the questions that we should have been asking. Because like for me, when we first heard about the Ousters, I was imagining them as being like literally primitives. But then we
Yeah.
finally see them, and what's interesting about like the experience of reading is that like you kind of anchor on your first impression, and your first impression is basically being misled to think that they're primitives. Then you actually see them and you realize that they're basically much better adapted to space than than even like the current hegemony technology. But you don't, or at least I didn't ask the further question like, well, wait a second, that should actually imply that they have a fairly robust industrial base and their own tech development and
Yeah.
all kinds. It should imply all kinds of things that did not occur to me, because the character is not asking the question, and all the characters have their bias. And I think that's good writing.
Yeah, well, and I think it's so intelligent of Simmons to introduce them to us through the lens of a military commander who sees them as only the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not asking the questions either because he doesn't care. They're just the bad guys. So that's the lens which they're painted through. And of course, the first time we get to see them in a different lens is through the eye of a diplomat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very intentional. Yeah. So I think I really want to see where the Ousters are going to play a huge role in the resolution of this thing. And I think what Simmons has basically said here is they are the future. They are the hope for humanity. Like we cannot keep living in the past. We cannot keep staying stagnant. We need to evolve. We need to move forward. We need to adapt and adopt and experience all that there is out there, and not just stay hung up on this past that's predicated on a lie. And so like part of me wishes that this book would have like showed his conceit and conclusion with that, but it just doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. I admit, I think I can say this now that the book is now that we're done talking about the book almost, that like I really, when this finished, I was really disappointed to learn that it had sequels that were like I think I might have known that it had sequels. Actually, no, I think I didn't even know it had sequels. And so when it finished, I was like, huh, I felt like it left some things hanging. And then I realized it had sequels, and I was like, oh, I'm not even seeing the whole story, and that
Yeah,
explains a lot. But then I was like, I don't know. I don't mean this to come off as like a huge criticism of the book, but I don't feel that compelled to read the sequels because
interesting.
um I I felt like I felt like even though this book didn't tell me everything I wanted to know, it was still extremely entertaining, and all of the stories were great, if not fully self-contained. Um, I don't know. I can't have difficulty expressing why I don't feel any real urge to read the sequel.
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely there with you that I still enjoyed this book as a contained individual experience, and I think that's because my favorite stories within this story were the ones that are contained individual things that even if they don't have like a complete resolution, they still feel like a short story that I would read. Like a lot of times short stories don't have like satisfactory climaxes just because it's like a snapshot. It's
Yeah.
like we dive into this world for a little bit and then we get out. And that's kind of what I felt like. So yeah, I mean, I kind of want to see. I kind of want to see where some of this stuff goes. Like I like a lot of these characters enough that I want to see what happens to them.
I want people to convince me to read the sequel if it's good, you know? Like
Okay,
if it's not great, tell me
calling all
that.
listeners.
Yeah,
Yeah.
calling all listeners, let me know because like I'll read it if I hear, you know, oh, you'll be so satisfied with how it ends, and yeah, I will. I don't know. Sometimes I feel a compulsion to read a book. Sometimes I want to go pick up the sequel right away.
Hmm.
And I think like this is not really it's not really like a plotty book, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it's a emotions book. It's a character empathy book, and that's kind of implies that I don't need to find out what happens next, because that's just not what was important about the reading experience.
I think that's absolutely fair.
Yeah.
All
All
right, let's
right,
finish this thing off.
let's do it. The consul turned to Saul Weintraub. What's that tune you're singing to Rachel? The scholar forced a grin and scratched his short beard. It's from an ancient flat film, pre-Hijira. Hell, it's pre-everything. Let's hear it, said Bronlamia, understanding what the consul was doing. Her face was very pale. Weintraub sang it, his voice thin and barely audible at first, but the tune was forceful and oddly compelling. Father Hoyt uncradled the balalaika and played along, the notes gaining confidence. Bronlamia laughed. Martin Silenus said in awe, My God, I used to sing this in my childhood. It's ancient. But who is the wizard? Asked Colonel Cassad, the amplified voice through his helmet oddly amusing in this context. And what is Oz? Asked Lamia. And just who is off to see this wizard? Asked the consul, feeling the black panic in him fade ever so slightly. Saul Weintraub paused and tried to answer their questions, explaining the plot of a flat film which had been dust for centuries. Never mind, said Bronlamia. You can tell us later. Just sing it again. Behind them, the darkness had engulfed the mountains as the storm swept down across the moors toward them. The sky continued to bleed light, but now the eastern horizon had paled slightly more than the rest. The dead city glowed to their left like stone teeth. Bronlamia took the lead again. Saul Weintraub sang more loudly, Rachel wiggling in delight. Leonard Hoyt uh, threw back his cape threw back his cape so as to better play the balalaika. Martin Silenus threw an empty bottle far out onto the sands and sang along, his deep voice surprisingly strong and pleasant above the wind. Fedman Kassan, sorry, Fedman Kassad pushed up his visor, shouldered his weapon, and joined in the chorus. The consul started to sing, thought about the absurd lyrics, laughed aloud, and started again.
They're off to see the wizard.
Yay! I thought that was great. That's a great ending.
Yeah, I do too. But thinking about it, so if we insert this into our kind of overarching theme of humanity's obsession with the past and the nostalgic culture that we no longer inherit, and how I think the end of the story basically decries that as bad.
Mm-hmm.
But then we end the story on this note of people singing the song from The Wizard of Oz as they walk down the road and head toward their own version of Oz, and how they're all terrified. They're walking into this unknown, and they find comfort in a silly song from their past that they don't even fully understand. And that to me almost shows the value of nostalgic old things that we might not fully get, but still can provide us with some comfort in the scariness that is living today.
Yeah, I like that quite a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's the the idea that the Wizard of Oz is pre everything. Yeah,
Yeah,
um, and just man, that's interesting. You've definitely put an interesting spin on that by pointing out that it's we've spent the whole book undermining this idea that the old things are the best, and but here they are anchoring onto this old thing for comfort. Yeah, um,
yeah,
it's and also yeah there's it's not really an ending, right, which is one of those things where you're like, yeah, well, it has a sequel, but like even for a book, even for a book in a series, it's an interesting way of just saying like you can't end the story as they go off to see the wizard. That's then they have to see the wizard.
right.
What's going to happen with the wizard, you know? So
But isn't the story almost refuting that in itself? Like, but who is the wizard, and what is this Oz, and just who is off to see the wizard? And then the character tries to explain, and it's like, that's not important.
yeah,
Just sing the song. And I think that's really interesting. Like this idea that um, all these people have no idea, they don't know where the song comes from. They don't know the meaning behind it. The meaning behind it is very specific and very pointed. They are walking down their own yellow brick road to meet their own Wizard of Oz, to ask the Wizard of Oz for something they need. It's very pointed and very specific, but none of them but Weintraub know what it means.
especially because the Wizard of Oz doesn't actually give them what they ask for. He just kind of tells them that they always had what they asked for
Yeah.
within their grasp the whole time, which is
And they stabs them with his knife hand.
yeah, right. Then he impales them on a tree, and that I mean, yeah, it's because the Wizard of Oz is not actually a monkey's paw story.
No.
It's a you had the power within you all along story, which
Right.
I kind of don't feel like that's the tone that the Hyperion saga is gonna end with. But
No, I don't think so either.
yeah, I don't know how far to interpret the Wizard of Oz connection exactly, but I really like what you said about it being something very old that they're taking solace in. It's almost like they're what's the word? They're taking ownership of it because they're like, look, I don't actually care what it means. I just
Yeah.
like how it sounds,
Yeah.
and it's helping me in this moment. It's like a life raft, and that's fine. And people are allowed to do that. We don't have to criticize them for it.
Sure. Yeah, I like that a lot. So you don't need to know who Hitler is and the
Yeah,
bad things he did. Just read Mein Kampf.
yeah, just
That's the lesson of the book.
yeah, right. Just
It's not. It's not. I was kidding. I was kidding. It's not. That's not really the lesson of the book. But I don't know. I really want to see what's next for me. Like that's I left this book saying I can't wait to read the other one, and I have like 5 books that I need to read before I get around to the sequel. But I am looking forward to checking out. I think the next one's called The Fall of Hyperion, which that sounded good.
yeah, sounds like everything's gonna be great.
But that is the end of our discussion. This was a tough one, Matt, because it was a tough one for I think a lot of reasons. A lot of which being this is half of a story, and it is very hard to conclude on what we think the themes of the book are when we don't know where that conclusion is heading.
Yeah, and usually in most of the books that we've covered in this book club, they didn't have this many characters, which is one way. And it's an odd structure. One of the ramifications of it being an odd structure is that it has many point of view characters, many sub stories that they're all related, of course, and they're all part of the same story, but also they all have their own thrust. And like
Yeah,
that's the thing, is you could have almost talked about each of these stories individually. Like the Saul Weintraub story, I feel like you could talk about for much longer than we did because there's so much in it. We chose a few things to focus on, which I think were the most important things. But there was a huge amount that we left out. So,
yeah,
and we obviously had to. But like that's this was a lot more of a sprawling book than usual.
yeah. It was very hard to kind of drill down and find stuff to pull. And yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We could do a multi-part series where we spend an entire 2 hours on each one of the stories, and we probably still wouldn't be able to cover everything that's going on in there. It is, I think it's a fantastically written book. I think it feels like I don't know if you've read a lot of Dan Simmons before. I have not.
No.
But this feels to me kind of like his White Album, where he's just dipping into different genres and trying out different styles, and then he came up with like a thing to tie them all together. And that is the kind of thing I always really enjoy in my art, whether it's music or literature. I enjoy someone like trying their hand at a different style, a different genre, a different tone, and I just really appreciated the experience of reading this book.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was fun. I want to learn more about his process and what in what order these ideas came to him. Did he decide he wanted to write a science fiction Canterbury Tales first, or did he have an idea for a story and then he had a lot of different characters and realized that the way to do it was with flashbacks, and then realized that there was a fun like because it is a really fun conceit, this idea that they're actually telling the stories to each other, and
Yeah.
it's not just like because there are plenty of stories where important information is doled out through flashbacks. But when you have the element of the stories being told, then you introduce the concept of, okay, this is what this character wants to convey, which is more than just like their memory of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. All right, it's time to talk about next month.
Okay.
So next month, it is every 6 months. I don't know if you guys know this, but every 6 months we do, instead of letting you guys vote on a book, we pick it ourselves. And it was my turn to pick the book, and I want to cross a book off my list that I am ashamed that I have never read. So I have picked Frank Herbert's Dune. We're going from one huge science fiction book to another. Oh, you just updated your thing. There's like dunes behind you. So yeah, we're gonna read Dune. I have never read this book, and I'm embarrassed that I've never read this book, and I can't wait to read it. So we're gonna be doing Dune on Friday, October 26th at 9:30 p.m. Central Time. It's gonna actually be on Friday this time because I am not traveling or anything. It'll be that day, and I can't wait to read this book. I know Kiefer is
Yeah.
every like I feel like I've lost like a lot of cred.
I love Dune a ridiculous amount.
Yeah.
I'll save plenty of talking, obviously, for the actual podcast, but
Yeah.
um,
I feel like this is going to be one of those ones where Matt is leading the discussion.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, this book is very formative for me, and a
I
lot to
have
say.
seen the film Dune, um, the bad one.
Yeah, that's a thing. It's a thing that
Unless,
exists.
of course, David Lynch purists would yell at me for calling it the bad one, but I don't know.
I was,
Yeah, but
I was thinking today actually about the fact that Lynch's Dune is that Dune is actually a very Lynchian story, which he chooses to for some reason direct as an action movie.
yeah. Have you ever seen the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune?
No, I'd love to though.
It's a very interesting documentary about the attempts of making that film, and man, that movie would have been incredible. But anyway, that's what we're doing next week, Dune. We're really excited about this. I am so excited to finally have an excuse to sit down and force myself to read this book. Let's see. EP asks, will you guys read Druid or The Terror at some point? I would love to read The Terror. That's another Dan Simmons book. Dan Simmons didn't just do sci-fi, Matt. He's done a lot of horror book. In fact, he's been praised by Stephen King for some of his horror, and I've been meaning to read his horror books for a long time. And now I feel like I need to more since I enjoyed this book so much.
Interesting. I haven't heard of either of those things. So apparently I'm not up on my Dan Simmons knowledge.
Apparently not. So disappointing.
I know.
Says the guy who has not read Dune. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys.
I guess
we're gonna fix it.
Even now?
Fix it, yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for everyone coming in and hanging out with us live here. For those listening on the podcast, come hang out with us next time. Come hang out live and ask questions and give your comments and tell us how wrong we are about Dune, which I'm sure I'll be, but Matt will guide me through it. It is a lot of fun. I love when people hang out and ask questions and comments, and it's great. This is why we do this in a live stream format and not just a normal podcast like the other stuff we do.
Yeah, yeah. We had a great time. So if you guys like what we do here at Doof Media and want to see more of it, head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/doofmedia, and consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. You get access to our private Discord server, as well as the ability to vote for which books we cover, except this month because we already picked it because it was one of our gimmies, and tons of other cool benefits. So go check it out.
All right, that's right. If you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us, you can find us on Twitter at doofmedia or email us at doofmedia@gmail.com. You can go put if you're emailing us, put book club in the subject header so we know how to file that away. And I can't wait to talk Dune. We'll see you all next month. Spice
Must flow.
Worms. Dunes.
Arrakis, Dune, Desert Planet.
Okay, that's enough.
I stopped recording now.
Me too. Woo! I needed a drink 20 minutes into that.
Yeah, I didn't have a drink at all, so that was my mistake. It's late, guys. We talked a long time.
I'm surprised we talked for that long.
I
didn't have any more slides than I normally do.
Yeah, I think that I don't know, I think we were both just into it.
It's just a big sprawling book, you know?
Yeah.
Just a lot. There's a lot there.
Yeah. There's a lot there, and there's a lot that's interesting to talk about, and there's also a lot to talk about that I hadn't like figured out, and I wanted to figure it out. So like, just the opportunity to be like, I don't know what's going on here, but I want to talk about it until something falls out of my head.
Yeah,
it makes sense, and I don't know if I succeeded, but that's kind of the fun of this.
I think we did. I think there were definitely moments where I was talking and something clicked. You know, that good feeling you get when something clicks in your head as you're saying it, and it seems to make sense. And then I felt that a few times tonight.
I agree that you said a lot of things that made sense.
Whatever, you said some great things too.
Oh, thank you. I've read Gene Wolfe books, but I think they would be very difficult to talk about in this format, honestly. But if people vote them in, then I guess we'll talk about them.
Yeah, I would love to do that. Should we send the link to... Let me do that. I'll send the link to submit books.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let me find it. We have a Google form that you can submit books. You can send as many as you want. There's just a few questions to ask about the book. We try to keep the length down. We don't want to read 1,000-page books every time. I'm saying this all while I'm killing time, so I can find where I put that. Book club. There it is. I still have awkward silence, even though I thought I killed enough time.
That's fine. I should have been covering for you there. Pretty tired though. Probably gonna go to bed pretty quick after this.
Yeah, we're about to shut this down. I just want to send this link out before.
Yeah. I confess I actually read Dune these last couple of weeks. I'm gonna have to reread it again next month, which is completely fine by me. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
There's the link.
Feel free to... Wait, did I get the right one? Let me click on it. Yeah. I need to change that because this just says the Daily Planet Book Club. Shit.
Oh, well.
Okay. Oh, well.
Easy
yeah, so that's... I mean, you guys can submit... Like, literally anyone could submit. They can submit as many times as they want. We'll pull 5 of the ones that we find interesting. We try to get books we haven't read before. Obviously, that doesn't always happen, like Dune, for Matt at least. But yeah, we make this as democratic as possible because we want to do books that you guys are interested in. We do allow ourselves like once every 6 months to pick one of the books ourselves, which is what we're doing this week. Although I bet if we put Dune up for a vote, it would have won.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think you're right.
All right, guys. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I'm glad you had fun. I say this every time, but this is the most fun thing we do for me personally.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think I agree.
and I'm sorry I had to move it from Friday. I was just Matt. It turns out Matt was sick, so it's actually all his fault. But
Yeah.
I was exhausted on Friday. It would have been a terrible show even if you were healthy. I would not have had any energy at all, so it would have been bad.
I think we still got a good turnout. So
Yeah, we did. Thanks for coming out on a Sunday, guys. Now I'm gonna go to bed.
me too. Good night, everyone.
Good night. For those of us that follow us or that are patrons, we will be recording our We've Got Worms session on Tuesday, right, Matt? I think we'll do it on Tuesday.
Probably. We might actually be ready Monday, but I think it's better to plan for Tuesday.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
All right, guys. Bye.
Bye.